Chapter 1 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 1. It was the evening of Madame Okraska's concert at the old St. James Hall. London was still the place of the muffled roar and the endearing ugliness. Horse buses plied soberly in an unwidened Piccadilly. The private motor was a curiosity. Berlin had not been emulated in an altered mall, nor New York in the facades of giant hotels. The Saturday and Monday pops were still an institution, and the bell of the muffin man, in such a wintry season, passed frequently along the foggy streets and squares. Already the epoch seems remote. Madame Okraska was pushing on her way from St. Petersburg to New York, and this was the only concert she was to give in London that winter. For many hours the enthusiasts who had come to secure unreserved seats had been sitting on the stone stairs that led to the balcony or gallery, or on the still narrower, darker, and colder flight that led to the orchestra from Piccadilly Place. From the adjacent hall they could hear the strains of the Moore and Burgess minstrels, blatant and innocuously vulgar, and the determined mirth, anatomized by distance, sounded a little melancholy. To those of an imaginative turn of mind, it might have seemed that they waited in a tunnel, at one far end of which could be perceived the tiny memory of tea at an aerated bread shop, and at the other the vision of the delights to which they would emerge. For there was no one in the world like Madame Okraska, and to see and hear her was worth cold and weariness and hunger. Not only was she the most famous of living pianists, but one of the most beautiful of women, and upon this restoring fact many of the most weary stayed themselves, returning again and again to gaze at the pictured face that adorned the outer cover of the programme. Illuminated by chill gas jets, armed with books and sandwiches, the serried and devoted ranks were composed of typical concert-goers, of types, in some cases, becoming as extinct as the muffin man. Young art students from the suburbs, dressed in Liberty serges and velveteens, and reading ninepenny editions of Browning and Rossetti, though a few, already, were reading Yeats. Middle-aged spinsters from Bayswater or South Kensington, who took their weekly concert as they took their daily bath. Many earnest young men, soft-hatted and long-haired, studying scores. The usual contingent of the fashionable and economical lady, and the pale-faced businessman, bringing an air of duty to the pursuit of pleasure. Some time before the doors opened, a growing urgency began to make itself felt. People got up from their insecurely balanced camp-stools, or rose stiffly from the stone steps, to turn and stand shoulder to shoulder, subtly transformed from comrades in discomfort to combatants for a hazardous reward. The field for personal endeavour was small. The stairs were narrow, and their occupants packed like sardines. Yet everybody hoped to get a better seat than their positions entitled them to hope for. Hope and fear increased in intensity with the distance from the doors, those mute, mystic doors, behind which had not yet been heard a chink or a shuffle, and against which leaned, now balefully visible, the earliest comers of all, jaded, pallid, but insufferably assured. The summons came at length in the sound of drawn bolts and chains, and a peremptory official voice, blood-tingling as a trumpet call, and the crowd, shoulder to shoulder and foot to foot, with rigid lips and eyes uplifted, began to mount like one man. Step by step they went, steady and wary, each pressing upon those who went before and presenting a resistant back to those who followed after. The close, emulous contacts bred stealthy strifes and hatreds. A small lady with short grey hair and thin red face and the conscienceless smiling eye of a hypnotized creature drove her way along the wall and mounted with the agility of a lizard to a place several steps above. Others were infected by the successful outlawry, and there were some moments of swaying and striving before the crowd adjusted itself to its self-protective solidity. Emerged upon the broader stairs, they ascended panting and scurrying in a wild stampede to the sudden quiet and chill and emptiness of the familiar hall, with its high-ranged plaster cupids, whose cheeks and breasts and thighs were thrown comically into relief by a thick coating of dust. Here a permanent fog seemed to hang under the roof, only a few lights twinkled frugally, and the querulous voice of the programme seller punctuated the monotonous torrent of feet. Row upon row, the seats were filled as if by tumultuous waters entering appointed channels. Programmes rustled, sandwiches were drawn from clammy packets, and the thin-faced lady, iniquitously ensconced in the middle of the front row in the gallery, had taken out a strip of knitting, and was blandly ready for the evening. "I always come up here," said one of the ladies from Kensington to a friend. "One hears her pianissimo more perfectly than anywhere else. What a magnificent programme! I shall be glad to hear her give the Schumann Fantasy in C major again." "I think I look forward more to the Bach Fantasy than to anything," said her companion. She exposed herself to a pained protest. "Oh, surely not! Not Bach! I do not come for my Bach to Okraska. She belongs too definitely to the romantics to grasp Bach. Beethoven, if you will. She may give us the Appassionata superbly, but not Bach. She lacks self-effacement." Liszt said that no one played Bach as she did. Authority did not serve her. Liszt may have said it, Brahms would not have, was the rejoinder. Down in the orchestra chairs the audience was roughly to be divided into the technical and the personal devotees. Those who chose seats from which they could dwell upon Madame Okraska's full face over the shining surfaces of the piano, or upon her profile from the side, and those who, from behind her back, were dedicated to the study of her magical hands. "I do hope," said a girl in the centre of the front row of chairs, a place of dizzy joy, for one might almost touch the goddess as she sat at the piano, "I do hope she's not getting fat. Someone said they heard she was. I never want to see her again if she gets fat. It would be too awful." The girl with her conjectured sadly that Madame Okraska must be well over 40. "I beg your pardon," a massive lady, dressed in an embroidered sack-like garment, and wearing many strings of iridescent shells around her throat, leaned forward from behind to say, "She is 46, I happen to know. A friend of mine has met Madame Okraska's secretary. 46, but she keeps her beauty wonderfully. Her figure is quite beautiful." An element of personal excitement was evident in the people who sat in these nearest chairs. It constituted a bond, though by no means a friendly one. Emulation, the irrepressible desire to impart knowledge, broke down normal barriers. The massive lady was slightly flushed and her manner almost menacing. Her information was received with a vague, half-resentful murmur. "She looks younger," she continued, while her listeners gave her an unwilling yet alert attention. "It is extraordinary how she retains her youth. But it tells the tragic life. One sees it in her eyes and lips." The first girl now put forward with resolution her pawn of knowledge. "It has been tragic, hasn't it? The dreadful man she was married to, by her relations, when she was hardly more than a child, and the death of her second husband. He was the Baron von Marwitz. Her real name is von Marwitz. Okraska is her maiden name. He was drowned in saving her life, you know. The Baron von Marwitz was drowned no one knows how. He was found drowned. She found his body. She went into a convent after his death." "A convent? I was reading a life of her in a magazine the other day, and nothing was said about a convent." The massive lady smiled tolerantly. Nothing would be. She has a horror of publicity. Yes, she is a mystic as well as an artist. She only resigned the religious life because of what she felt to be her duty to her adopted daughter. One sees the mystical side in her face and hears it in her music. Madame Okraska was one of those about whose footsteps legends rise, and legend could add little to the romantic facts of her life. The poverty of her youth, her debut as a child prodigy at Warsaw, and the sudden fame that had followed it, the coronets that had been laid at her feet, her private tragedies, cosmopolitan friendships, her scholarship, caprices and generosities. She had been the Egeria, smiling in mystery, of half a dozen famous men, and it was as satisfactory to the devotee to hear that she always wore white and drank coffee for her breakfast as that Rubinstein and Liszt had blessed her, and Leschetizky said that she had nothing to learn. Her very origin belonged to the realm of romantic fiction. Her father, a Polish music master in New Orleans, had run away with his pupil, a beautiful Spanish girl of a good Creole family. Their child had been born in Cracow while the Austrians were bombarding it in 1848. The lights were now all up and the stalls filling. Ladies and gentlemen from the suburbs, over early, were the first comers, eager schoolgirls marshalled by governesses, scrupulous students with music under their arms, and finally the rustling, shining, chattering crowd of fashionable London. The massive lady had by now her little audience, cowed, if still slightly sulky, well in hand. She pointed out each notability to them, and indirectly to all her neighbours. The Duchess of Bannister and Lady Champney, the famous beauty. The Prime Minister, whom the girls could have recognised for themselves, and Sir Alliston Compton, the poet. Had they read his sonnet to Madame Okraska last year in the Fortnightly? They had not. I wonder who that odd-looking girl is with him and the old lady, one of them ventured. A little granddaughter, a little niece, said the massive lady, who did not know. Poor Sir Alliston's wife is in a lunatic asylum. Isn't it a melancholy head? But now one of her listeners, a lady also in the front row, leaned forward to say hurriedly and deprecatingly, her face suffused with shyness, "That nice young girl is Madame Okraska's adopted daughter. The old lady is Mrs. Forrester, Madame Okraska's great friend. My sister-in-law was for many years a governess in her family, and that is how I come to know." All those who heard her turned their eyes upon the young girl, who, in an old-fashioned white cloak, with a collar of swansdown turned up round her fair hair, was taking her place with her companions in the front row of the orchestra stalls. Even the massive lady was rapt away to silence. "But I thought the adopted daughter was an Italian," one girl at last commented, having gazed her fill at the being so exalted by fortune. "Her skin is rather dark, but that yellow hair doesn't look Italian." "She is a Norwegian," said the massive lady, keeping, however, an eye on the relative of Mrs. Forrester's governess. "The child of Norwegian peasants. Don't you know the story? Madame Okraska found the poor little creature lost in a Norwegian forest, leaped from her carriage and took her into her arms. The parents were destitute, and she bought the child from them. She is the very soul of generosity." "She doesn't look like a peasant," said the girl, with a flavour of discontent, as though a more apparent rusticity would have lent special magnanimity to Madame Okraska's benevolence. But the massive lady assured her, "Oh yes, it is the true Norse type. Their peasantry has its patrician quality. I have been to Norway. Sir Alliston looks very much moved, doesn't he? He has been in love with Madame Okraska for years." And she added with a deep sigh of satisfaction, "There has never been a word whispered against her reputation, never a word. Pure as the foam on midmost ocean tossed." Among the crowds thronging densely to their places, a young man of soldierly aspect, with a dark narrow face, black hair, and square blue eyes, was making his way to a seat in the third row of stalls. His name was Gregory Jardine. He was not a soldier, though he looked one, but a barrister, and he was content to count himself, not altogether incorrectly, a Philistine in all matters aesthetic. Good music he listened to with, as he put it, unintelligent and barbarous enjoyment, and since he had shamefully never yet heard the great pianist, he had bought the best stall procurable some weeks before, and now, after a taxing day in the law courts, had foregone his after-dinner coffee in order not to miss one note of the opening appassionata. It was a sonata he was very fond of. He sometimes picked out the air of the slow movement on the piano with heavy deliberation. His musical equipment did not carry him as far as the variations. When he reached his seat he found it to be by chance next to that of his sister-in-law, his brother Oliver's wife, a pretty jewelled and jewel-like young woman, an American of a complicatedly cosmopolitan type. Gregory liked Betty Jardine, and always wondered how she had come to marry Oliver, whom he rather scorned. But he was not altogether pleased to find her near him. He preferred to take his music in solitude, and Betty was very talkative. "Well, this is nice, Gregory," she said. "You and Captain Ashton know each other, don't you? No, I couldn't persuade Oliver to come. He wouldn't give up his whist. Isn't Oliver dreadful? He moves from the saddle to the whist table and back again, and that is all. Captain Ashton and I have been comparing notes. We find that we have missed hardly any of Madame Okraska's concerts in London. I was only 10 when I heard the first she ever gave here. My governess took me. And actually Captain Ashton was here on that day too. Wasn't she a miracle of loveliness? It was 20 years ago. She had already her European reputation. It was just after she had divorced that horrible first husband of hers and married the Baron von Marwitz. This isn't your initiation, of course, Gregory." "Actually my initiation," said Gregory, examining the portrait of Madame Okraska on the cover of the programme. "But you've seen her at Mrs. Forrester's." "She always stays with Mrs. Forrester." "I know, but I've always missed her, or, at all events, never have been asked to meet her." "I certainly never have been," said Betty Jardine. "But Mrs. Forrester thinks of me as frivolity personified, I know, and doesn't care to admit anything lower than a cabinet minister or a poet laureate when she has her lion domiciled. She is an old darling, but between ourselves, she does take her lions a little too seriously, doesn't she? Well, prepare for a coup de foudre, Gregory. You'll be sure to fall in love with her. Everybody falls in love with her. Captain Ashton has been in love with her for 20 years. She is extraordinary." "I'm ready to be subjugated," said Gregory. "Do people really hang on her hands and kiss them?" "Shall I want to hang on her hands and kiss them?" "There is no telling what she will do with us," said Lady Jardine. Gregory Jardine's face, however, was not framed to express enthusiasm. It was caustic, cold, and delicate. His eyes were as clear and as hard as a sky of frosty morning, and his small, firm lips were hard. His chin and lower lip advanced slightly, so that when he smiled his teeth met edge to edge, and the little black mustache, to which he often gave an absent upward twist, lent an ironic quality to this chill, gay smile, at times almost Mephistophelian. He sat twisting the moustache now, leaning his head to listen, amidst the babel of voices, to Betty Jardine's chatter and the thrills of infectious expectancy that passed over the audience like breezes over a cornfield, left him unaffected. His observant, indifferent glance had in it something of the schoolboy's barbarian calm and something of the disabused impersonality of worldly experience. "Who is the young lady with Mrs. Forrester?" he asked presently. "In white, with yellow hair, just in front of us. Do you know?" Betty had leaned forward to look. "Don't you even know her by sight?" she said. "That is Miss Woodruff, the girl who follows Madame Okraska everywhere. She attached herself to her years ago, I believe, in Rome or Paris. Some sort of little art student she was. What a bore that sort of devotion must be." Isn't she queer?" "I heard that she's an adopted daughter," said Captain Ashton, "the child of Norwegian peasants, and that Madame Okraska found her in a Norwegian forest, by moonlight. A most romantic story." "A fable, I think. Someone was telling me about her the other day. She is only a camp follower and protégée, and a compatriot of mine. She is an orphan, and Madame Okraska supports her." "She doesn't look like a protégée," said Gregory Jardine, his eyes on the young person thus described. "She looks like a protector." "I should think she must be most of all a problem," said Betty. "What a price to pay for celebrity, these hangers on who make one ridiculous by their infatuation. Madame Okraska is incapable of defending herself against them, I hear. The child's clothes must have come from Norway." The protégée, protector or problem, who turned to them now and then her oddly blunted, oddly resolute young profile, had tawny hair and a sun-browned skin. She wore a little white silk frock with flat bows of dull blue upon it. Her evening cloak was bordered with swansdown. Two black bows, one at the crown of her head and one at the nape of her neck, secured the thick plaits of her hair, which was parted and brushed up from her forehead in a bygone school-girlish fashion. She made Gregory think of a picture by Alfred Stevens he had seen somewhere, and of an archaic Greek statue, and her appearance and demeanour interested him. He continued to look at her, while the unrest and expectancy of the audience rolled into billows of excitement. A staid, melancholy man, forerunner of the great artist, had appeared and performed his customary and cryptic function. "Why do they always screw up the piano stool at the last moment?" Betty Jardine murmured. "Is it to pepper our tongues with anguish before the claret? Oh, she must be coming now. She always keeps one waiting like this." The billows had surged to a storm. Signs of frenzy were visible in the faces on the platform. They had caught a glimpse of the approaching divinity. "Here she is!" cried Betty Jardine. Like everybody else, she was clapping frantically. Like everybody, that is, except Gregory Jardine, for Gregory, his elbow in his hand, his fingers still neatly twisting the end of his moustache, continued to observe the young girl in the front row, whose face, illuminated and irradiated, was upturned to the figure now mounting to the platform. End of chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Denise Nordell. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 2. The hush that had fallen was like the hush that falls on alpine watchers in the moment before sunrise, and, with the great musician slow emerging from below, it was as if the sun had risen. She came with her indolent step, the thunder of hands and voices greeting her, and those who gazed at her from the platform saw the pearl-wreathed hair and opulent white shoulders, and those who gazed at her from beneath saw the strange and musing face. Then she stood before them, and her dark eyes dwelt, impassive and melancholy, upon the sea of faces, tumultuous and blurred with clapping hands. The sound was like the roaring of the sea, and she stood as a goddess might have stood at the brink of the ocean, indifferent and unaware, absorbed in dreams of ancient sorrow. The ovation was so prolonged, and she stood there for so long, hardly less the indifferent goddess because, from time to time, she bowed her own famous bow, stately, old-fashioned, formally and sublimely submissive, that every eye in the great audience could feast upon her in a rapturous assurance of leisure. She was a woman of 48, of an ample though still beautiful figure. Her flowing dress of white brocade made no attempt to compress, to sustain, or to attenuate. No one could say that a woman who stood as she did, with the port of a goddess, the small head majestically poised over such shoulders and such a breast, was getting fat, yet no one could deny that there was redundancy. She was not redundant as other women were, she was not elegant as other women were. She seemed in nothing like others. Her dress was strange. It had folds and amplitudes and dim disks of silver broideries at breast and knee that made it like the dress of some Venetian lady drawn at random from an ancestral marriage coffer and put on dreamily with no thought of aptness. Her hair was strange. No other woman's hair was massed and folded as was hers, hair dark as night and intertwined and looped with twisted strands of pearl and diamond. Her face was strange, that crowning face known to all the world. Disparate racial elements mingled in the long southern oval and the Slavonic modeling of brow and cheekbone. The lips, serene and passionate, deeply sunken at the corners and shadowed with a penciling of down, were the lips of Spain. All the mystery of the South was in the grave and tragic eyes. Yet the eyes were cold, and touches of wild ancestral suffering, like the sudden clash of spurs in the langurs of a polonaise, marked the wide nostrils and the heavy eyelids and the broad, black, crooked eyebrows that seemed to stammer a little in the perfect sentence of her face. She subjugated and she appealed. Her adorers were divided between the longing to lie down under her feet and to fold her protectingly in their arms. Calf love is an undying element in human nature, a shamefaced derogatory name for the romantic, self-immolating emotion woven from fancy, yearning, and the infection of others' ardor. Love of this foam and flame quality, too tender to be mere aesthetic absorption in a beautiful object, too selfless to be sensual, too intense to be only absurd, rose up towards Madame Okraska and encompassed her from hundreds of hearts and eyes. The whole audience was for her one vast heart of adoration, one fixed face of half-hypnotized tenderness. And there she stood before them, Madame Okraska, whom crowned heads delighted to honor, Madame Okraska who got £1,000 a night, Madame Okraska who played as no one in the world could play, looking down over them, looking up and around at them as if, now, a little troubled by the prolonged adulation, patient yet weary, like a mistress assaulted after long absence by the violent joy of a great Newfoundland dog, smiling a little though buffeted, and unwilling to chill the ardent heart by a reprimand. And more than all, she was like a great white rose that, fading in the soft, thick, scented air of a hothouse, droops languidly with loosened petals. They let her go at last, and she took her place at the piano. Her hands fell softly on a group of dreamy ascending chords. Her face then, in a long pause, took on a rapt expectancy and power. She was the priestess waiting before her altar for the descent of the god, glorious and dreadful. And it was as if with the chill and shudder of a possession that, breathing deeply, drawing her shoulders a little together, she lifted her hands and played. She became the possessed and articulate priestess, her soul, her mind, her passion lent to the message spoken through her. The tumult and insatiable outcry of the Appassionata spread like a river over her listeners. And as she played, her face grew more rapt in its brooding concentration, the eyes half closed, the nostrils wide, the jaw dropping and giving to the mouth an expression at once relaxed and vigilant. To criticize with the spell of Madame Okraska's personality upon one was hardly possible. Emerged from the glamour, there were those, pretending to professional discriminations, who suggested that she lacked the masculine and classic disciplines of interpretation, that her rendering, though breathed through with noble dignities, was colored by a capricious and passionate personality, that it was the feeling rather than the thought of the music that she excelled in expressing, its suffering rather than its serenity. Only a rare listener, here and there among her world-wide audiences, was aware of deeper deficiencies and of the slow changes that time had wrought in her art. For it was inspiration no longer, it was the memory of inspiration. The nemesis of the artist who expresses not what he feels, but what he is expected to feel, what he has undertaken to feel, had fallen upon the great woman. Her art, too, showed the fragrant taint of an artificial atmosphere. She had played 10 times when she should have played once. She lived on her capital of experience, no longer renewing her life, and her renderings had lost that quality of the greatest, the living communication with the experience embodied in the music. It was on the stereotyped memories of such communication that she depended, on the half-hypnotic possession by the past, filling in vacancies with temperamental caprice or an emotion no longer the music's but her own. But to the enchanted ear of the multitude, professional and unprofessional, the essential vitality was there, the vitality embodied to the enchanted eye by the white figure with its drooping, pearl-wreathed head and face sunken in somber ecstasy. She gave them all they craved: passion's stormy struggle, the tears of hopeless love, the chill smile of lassitude in accepted defeat, the unappeasable longing for the past. They listened, and their hearts lapsed back from the hallucinated unity of enthusiasm, each to its own identity, an identity isolated, intensified, tortured exquisitely by the expression of dim yearnings. All that had been beautiful in the pain and joy that through long ages had gone to the building up of each human consciousness re-entered and possessed it: the fragrance of blossoming trees, the farewell gaze of dying eyes, the speechless smile of lovers, ancestral memories of springtimes, loves, and partings, evoked by this poignant lure from dim realms of subconsciousness, like subterranean rivers rising through creeks and crannies towards the lifted wand of the diviner. It seemed the quintessence of human experience, the ecstasy of perfect and enfranchising sorrow, distilled from the shackling, smirching half-sorrows of actual life. Some of the listening faces smiled, some were sodden, stupefied rather than enlightened, some showed a sensual, rudimentary gratification, some, lapped in the tide, yet unaware of its significance, were merely silly. But no Orpheus, wildly harping through the woods, ever led more enthralled and subjugated listeners. Gregory Jardine's face was neither sodden nor silly nor sensual, but it did not wear the enchanted look of the true votary. Instinctively this young man, though it was emotion that he found in music, resisted any too obvious assault upon his feelings, taking refuge in irony from their force when roused. For the form of music and its intellectual content he had little appreciation, and he was thus the more exposed to its emotional appeal. But his intuition of the source and significance of the appeal remained singularly just and accurate. He could not now have analyzed his sense of protest and dissatisfaction, yet while the charm grasped and encircled him, making him, as he said to himself, idiotically grovel or inanely soar, he repelled the poignant sweetness, and the thrills that went through him were thrills of half-unwilling joy. He sat straightly, his arms folded, his head bent as he twisted the end of his mustache, his eyes fixed on the great musician, and he wondered what was the matter with him or with her. It was as if he couldn't get at the music. Something interfered, something exquisite yet ambiguous, alluring yet never satisfying. His glance fell presently from the pianist's drooping head to the face of the protégé, and the contrast between what was expressed by this young person's gaze and attitude and what he was himself feeling again drew his attention to her. No groveling and no soaring was here, but an elation almost stern, a brooding concentration almost maternal, a dedicated power. Madame Okraska, he reflected, must be an extraordinary person if she really deserved that gaze. He didn't believe that she quite did. His dissatisfaction with the music extended itself to the musician, and, looking from her face to the girl's, he remembered with skepticism Betty's account of their relation. A group of Chopin preludes and a Brahms Rhapsody Hongroise brought the first half of the concert to a close, and Gregory watched with amusement during the ensuing scene the vagaries of the intoxicated crowd. People rose to their feet, clapping, shouting, bellowing, screaming. He saw on the platform the face of the massive lady, haggard, fierce, devouring; the face of the shy lady, suffused, the eyes half dazed with adoration like those of a saint in rapture. Old Mrs. Forrester, with her juvenile auburn head, laughed irrepressibly while she clapped like a happy child. The old poet was nearly moved to tears. Only the protégée remained, as it were, outside the infection. She smiled slightly and steadily, as if in a proud contentment, and clapped now and then quite softly, and turned once and scanned the audience with eyes accustomed to ovations and appraising the significance of this one. Madame Okraska was recalled 6 times, but she could not be prevailed upon to give an encore, though for a long time a voice bayed intermittently, "The Berceuse! Chopin's Berceuse!" The vast harmonies of entreaty and delight died down to sporadic solos, taken up more and more faint-heartedly by weary, yet still hopeful, hands. Still smiling slightly, with a preoccupied air, the young girl looked about her, or leaned forward to listen to some kindly bantering addressed to her by Sir Alliston. She hardly spoke, but Gregory perceived that she was by no means shy. She so pleasantly engaged his attention that when Sir Alliston got up from his seat next hers there was another motive than the mere wish to speak to his old friend, in his intention of joining Mrs. Forrester for a few moments. The project was not definite, and he abandoned it when his relative, Miss Eleanor Scrotton, tense, significant, and wearing the sacramental expression customary with her on such occasions, hurried to the empty seat and dropped into it. Eleanor's enthusiasms oppressed him, and Betty had told him that Madame Okraska was become the most absorbing of them. His mother and Eleanor's had been cousins. Her father, the late Sir Jonas Scrotton, heavily distinguished in the world of literature and politics, had died only the year before. Gregory remembered him as a vindictive and portentous old man presiding at Miss Scrotton's tea parties in a black silk skull-cap, and one could but admire in Miss Scrotton the reverence and devotion that had not only borne with but gloried in him. If the amplitude of his mantle had not descended upon her, one might metaphorically say that the black skull-cap had. Gregory felt that he might have liked Eleanor better if she hadn't been so unintermittently and unilluminatingly intelligent. She wrote scholarly articles in the graver reviews, articles that he invariably skipped. She was always armed with an appreciation, and she had the air of thinking the intellectual reputation of London very much her responsibility. Above all, she was dowered with an overwhelming power of enthusiasm. Eleanor dressed well and had a handsome, commanding profile with small, compressed lips and large, prominent, melancholy eyes that wickedly reminded Gregory of the eyes of a beetle. Beneath the black feather boa that was thrown round her neck, her thin shoulder blades, while she talked to Mrs. Forrester and sketched with pouncing fingers the phrasing of certain passages, jerked and vibrated oddly. Mrs. Forrester nodded, smiled, acquiesced. She was rather fond of Eleanor. Their talk was for each other. Miss Woodruff, unheeded, but with nothing of the air of one consciously insignificant, sat looking before her. Beside Eleanor's vehemence and Mrs. Forrester's vivacity, she made Gregory think of a tranquil landscape seen at dawn. He was thus thinking and looking at her when, as though subconsciously aware of his gaze, she suddenly turned her head and looked round at him. Her eyes, in the long moment while their glances were interchanged, were so clear and deliberate, so unmoved by anything but a certain surprise, that he felt no impulse to pretend politely that he had not been caught staring. They scrutinized each other gravely, serenely, intently, until a thunder of applause, like a tidal wave surging over the hall, seemed to engulf their gaze. Madame Okraska was once more emerging. Miss Scrotton, catching up her boa, her programme and her fan, scuttled back to her seat with an air of desperate gravity. Sir Alliston returned to his. Mrs. Forrester welcomed him with a smile and a finger at her lips. And as the pianist seated herself and cast a long glance over the still, disarranged, and cautiously rustling audience, Gregory saw that Miss Woodruff had no further thought for him. End of Chapter 2, recording by Denise Nordell, Modesto, California.
Chapter 3 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 3. Mrs. Forrester was dispensing tea in her lofty drawing-room, which, with its illumined heights and dim recesses, gave to the ceremony an almost ritualistic state. Mrs. Forrester's drawing-room, and Mrs. Forrester herself, were long-established features of London, and not to have sat beneath the Louis Quinze chandelier, nor have drunk tea out of the blue Worcestershire cups, was to have missed something significant of the typical London spectacle. The drawing-room seemed most characteristic when one came to it from a fog outside, as people had done today, and when Mrs. Forrester was found presiding over the blue cups. She was an old lady with auburn hair, elaborately dressed, and singularly bound in snoods of velvet. She wore flowing silken trains and loose ruffled sacques of a curious bygone cut, and upon each wrist was clasped, mounted on a velvet band, a large square emerald set in heavily chased gold. The glance of her eyes was as surprisingly youthful as the color of her hair, and her face, though complicatedly wrinkled, had an almost girlish gaiety and vigor. Abrupt and merry, Mrs. Forrester was arresting to the attention, and rather alarming. She swept aside bores. She selected the significant. Socially, she could be rather merciless, but her kindness was without limits when she attached herself, and in private life she suffered fools, if not gladly, at all events humorously, in the persons of her 3 heavy and exemplary sons, who had married wives as unimpeachable and as uninteresting as themselves, and provided her with a multitude of grandchildren. Mrs. Forrester fulfilled punctiliously all her duties towards these young folk, and it never occurred to her sons and daughters-in-law that they and their interests were not her chief preoccupation. The energy and variety of her nature were, however, given to her social relations and to her personal friendships, which were many and engrossing. These friendships were always highly flavored. Mrs. Forrester had a flair for genius, and needed no popular accrediting to make it manifest to her. And it wasn't enough to be merely a genius. There were many of the species, eminent and emblazoned, who were never asked to come under the Louis Quinze chandelier. She asked of her talented friends personal distinction, the power of being interesting in more than their art. Such a genius, preeminently such a one, was Madame von Marwitz. She was more than under the chandelier. Mrs. Forrester's house, when she was in London, was her home. "I am safe with you," she had said to Mrs. Forrester. "With you I am never pursued and never bored." Where Mrs. Forrester evaded and relegated bores, Madame von Marwitz sombrely and helplessly hated them. "What can I do?" she said. "If no one will protect me, I am delivered to them. It is a plague of locusts. They devour me. Oh, their letters! Oh, their flowers! Oh, their love and their stupidity! No, the earth is black with them." Madame von Marwitz was protected from the swarms while she visited her old friend. The habits of the house were altered to suit hers. She stayed in her rooms or came down as she chose. She had complete liberty in everything. To-day she had not as yet appeared, and everyone had come with the hope of seeing her. There was Lady Campion, the most tactful and discreet of admirers, and Sir Alliston, who would be perhaps asked to go up to her if she did not come down, and Eleanor Scrotton, who would certainly go up unasked, and old Miss Harding, a former governess of Mrs. Forrester's sons, and a person privileged, who had come leading an evident yet pathetic locust, her brother's widow, little Miss Harding, the shy lady of the platform. Mrs. Harding had told Mrs. Forrester about this sister-in-law, and of how, since her husband's death, she had lived for philanthropy and music in the person of Madame Okraska. She had never met her. She did not ask to meet her now. She would only sit in a corner and gaze. Mrs. Forrester had been moved by the account of such humble faith, and had told Miss Harding to bring her sister-in-law. "I have sent for Karen," Mrs. Forrester said, greeting Gregory Jardine, who came in after Miss and Mrs. Harding. "She will tell us if our chances are good. It was your first time last night, wasn't it, Gregory? I do hope that she may come down." Gregory Jardine was not a bore, but Mrs. Forrester suspected him to be one of the infatuated. He belonged, she imagined, seeing him appear so promptly after his initiation, to the category of dazzled circlers who fell into her drawing-room in their myriads while Mercedes was with her, like frizzled moths into a candle. Mrs. Forrester had sympathy with moths, and was fond of Gregory, whom she greeted with significant kindliness. "I never ask her to come down," she went on, now to explain to him and to the Hardings. "Never, never. She could not bear that. But she often does come, and she has heard to-day from Karen Woodruff that special friends are hoping to see her. So your chances are good, I think. Ah, here is Karen." Gregory did not trouble to undeceive his old friend. It was his habit to have tea with her once or twice a month, and his motive in coming to-day had hardly been distinguishable from his usual impulse. If he had come hoping to see anybody, it had been to see the protégée, and he watched her now as she advanced down the great room with her cheerful, unembarrassed look, the look of a person serenely accustomed to a publicity in which she had no part. Seen thus at full length and in full face, he found her more than ever like an Alfred Stevens and an archaic Greek statue. Long-limbed, thick-waisted, spare and strong, she wore a straight grey dress, the dress of a little convent girl coming into the parlour on a day of visits, which emphasized the boyish aspect of her figure. Narrow frills of white were at wrist and neck. Her shoes were low-heeled and square-toed, and around her neck a gold locket hung on a black velvet ribbon. Mrs. Forrester held out her hand to her with the undiscerning kindliness that greets the mere emissary. "Well, my dear, what news of our Tante? Is she coming, do you think?" she inquired. "This is Lady Campion. She has never yet met Tante." The word was pronounced in German fashion. "I am not sure that she will come," said Miss Woodruff, looking around the assembled circle, while Mrs. Forrester still held her hand. "She is still very tired, so I cannot be sure. I hope so." She smiled calmly at Sir Alliston and Miss Scrotton, who were talking together, and then lifted her eyes to Gregory, who stood near. "You know Mr. Jardine?" Mrs. Forrester asked, seeing the pleased recognition on the girl's face. "It was his first time last night." "No, I do not know him," said Miss Woodruff, "but I saw him at the concert. Was it his first time? Think of that." "Now sit here, child, and tell me about Tante," said Mrs. Forrester, drawing the girl down to a chair beside her. "I saw that she was very tired this morning." "She had her massage?" Mrs. Forrester questioned in a lower voice. "Yes, and fortunately she was able to sleep for 2 hours after that. Then Mr. Schultz came and she had to see him, and that was tiring." Mr. Schultz was Madame Okraska's secretary. "Dear, dear, what a pity that he had to bother her. Did she drink the egg flip I had sent up to her? Mrs. Jenkins makes them excellently as a rule." "I did my best to persuade her," said Miss Woodruff, "but she did not seem to care for it." "Didn't care for it? Was it too sweet? I warned Mrs. Jenkins that her tendency was to put in too much sugar." "That was it." Miss Woodruff smiled at the other's penetration. "She tasted it and said, 'Trop sucré,' and put it down. But it was really very nice. I drank it," said Miss Woodruff. "But I am so grieved. I shall speak severely to Mrs. Jenkins." Mrs. Forrester murmured, preoccupied. "I am afraid our chances aren't good to day, Lady Campion." She turned from Miss Woodruff to say, "You must come and dine one night while she is with me. I am always sure of her for dinner." "She really isn't coming down?" Miss Scrotton leaned over the back of Miss Woodruff's chair to ask with some asperity of manner. "Shall I wait for a little before I go up to her?" "I can't tell," the young girl replied. "She said she did not know whether she could come or not. She is lying down and reading." "She does not forget that she comes to me for tea to-morrow?" "I do not think so, Miss Scrotton." "Lady Campion wants to talk to you, Karen," Mrs. Forrester now said. "Come to this side of the table." And as Sir Alliston was engaged with Miss and Mrs. Harding, Gregory was left to Eleanor Scrotton. Miss Scrotton felt irritation rather than affection for Gregory Jardine, yet he was not unimportant to her. Deeper than her pride in old Sir Jonas was her pride in her connection with the Fanshaws, and Gregory's mother had been a Fanshawe. Gregory's very indifference to her and to the standards of the Scrottons had always given to intercourse with him a savour at once acid yet interesting. Though she knew many men of more significance, she remained far more aware of him and his opinions than of theirs. She would have liked Gregory to show more consciousness of her and his relationship, of the fact that she too had Fanshawe blood in her veins. She would have liked to impress or please or, at worst, to displease him. She would very much have liked to secure him more frequently for her dinners and her teas. He vexed and he allured her. "Do you really mean that last night was the first time you ever heard Mercedes Okraska?" she said, moving to a sofa, to which, somewhat unwillingly, Gregory followed her. "It makes me sorry for you. It's as if a person were to tell you that they'd never before seen the mountains or the sea. If I'd realized that you'd never met her, I could have arranged that you should. She often comes to me quite quietly and meets a few friends. She was so devoted to dear father. She called him the hammer of the gods. I have the most wonderful letter that she wrote me when he died," Miss Scrotton said, lowering her voice to a reverent pause. "Between ourselves," she went on, "I do sometimes think that our dear Mrs. Forrester cherishes her a little too closely. I confess that I love nothing more than to share my good things. I don't mean that dear Mrs. Forrester doesn't, but I should ask more people, frequently and definitely, to meet Mercedes, if I were in her place." "But if Madame Okraska won't come down and see them?" Gregory inquired. "Ah, but she will, she will," Miss Scrotton said earnestly, "if it is thought out, arranged for carefully. She doesn't, naturally, care to come down on chance, like to-day. She does want to know whom she's to meet if she makes the effort. She knows of course that Sir Alliston and I are here, and that may bring her. I do hope so for your sake. But of course if she does not come I go up to her. With Mrs. Forrester I am, I think, her nearest friend in England. She has stayed with me in the country. My tiny flat here would hardly accommodate her. I am going, did you know it, to America with her next week." "No, really, for a tour?" "Yes, through the States. We shall be gone till next summer. I know several very charming people in New York and Boston, and can help to make it pleasant for Mercedes. Of course for me it is the opportunity of a lifetime. Quite apart from her music, she is the most remarkable woman I have ever known." "She's clever?" "Clever is too trivial a word. Her genius goes through everything. We read a great deal together. Dante, Goethe, French essayists, our English poets. To hear her read poetry is almost as wonderful an experience as to hear her play. Isn't it an extraordinary face? One sees it all in her face, I think." "She is very unusual looking." "Her face," Miss Scrotton pursued, ignoring her companion's trite comments, "embodies the thoughts and dreams of many races. It always makes me think of Pater's Mona Lisa, you remember. Hers is the head upon which all the ends of the world are come, and the eyelids are a little weary. She is of course a profoundly tragic person." "Has she been very unfortunate?" "Unfortunate indeed. Her youth was passed in bitter poverty. Her first marriage was disastrous, and when joy came at last in an ideal second marriage, it was shattered by her husband's mysterious death." "Yes, he was drowned. Found drowned in the lake on their estate in Germany. Mercedes has never been there since. She has never recovered. She is a broken-hearted woman. She sees life as a dark riddle. She counts herself as one of the entombed." "Dear me," Gregory murmured. Miss Scrotton glanced at him with some sharpness, but finding his blue eyes fixed abstractedly on Karen Woodruff, exonerated him from intending to be disagreeable. "Her childlessness has been a final grief," she added. "A child, as she has often told me, would be a resurrection from the dead." "And the little girl?" Gregory inquired. "Is she any solace? What is the exact relationship? I heard that she calls her Tante." "The right to call her Tante is one of Mercedes's gifts to her. She is no relation at all. Mercedes picked her up, literally from the roadside. She is 24, you know, not a child." "So the story is true about the Norwegian peasants and the forest?" "I have to contradict that story at least twice a day," said Miss Scrotton with a smile, half indulgent and half weary. "It is true that Karen was found in a forest, but it was the forest of Fontainebleau, tout simplement. And it is true that she has Norwegian blood. Her mother was a Norwegian. She was the wife of a Norwegian artist in Rome. And there, Karen's father, an American, a sculptor of some talent, I believe, met her and ran away with her. They were never married. They lived on chestnuts up among the mountains in Tuscany, I believe, and the mother died when Karen was a little child, and the father when she was 12. Some relatives of the father's put her in a convent school in Paris, and she ran away from it, and Mercedes found her on the verge of starvation in the forest of Fontainebleau. The Baron von Marwitz had known Mr. Woodruff in Rome, and Mercedes persuaded him to take the child into their lives. She hadn't a friend or a penny in the world. The father's relatives were delighted to be rid of her, and Mercedes has had her on her hands ever since. That is the true story." "Isn't she fond of her?" Gregory asked. "Yes, she is fond of her," Miss Scrotton, with some impatience, replied, "but she is none the less a burden. For a woman like Mercedes, with a life overfull and a strength continually overtaxed, the care and responsibility is an additional weight and weariness." "Well, but if she misses children so much, this takes the place," Gregory objected. "Takes the place," Miss Scrotton repeated, "of a child of her own? This little nobody, and an uninteresting nobody too. Oh, she is a good girl, a very good girl, and she makes herself fairly useful in elementary ways, but how can you imagine that such a tie can satisfy maternal craving?" "How does she make herself useful?" Gregory asked, waiving the question of maternal cravings. He had vexed Miss Scrotton a good deal, but the theme was one upon which she could not resist enlarging. Anything connected with Madame von Marwitz was for her of absorbing interest. "Well, she is a great deal in Cornwall, at Mercedes's place there," she informed him. "It's a wonderfully lovely place, Les Solitudes. Mercedes built the house. Karen and old Mrs. Talcott look after the little farm and keep things in order." "Old Mrs. Talcott? Where does she come in?" "Ah, that is another of Mercedes's romantic benevolences. Mrs. Talcott is a sort of old pensioner, a distant family connection, the funniest old American woman you can conceive of. She has been with Mercedes since her childhood, and, like everybody else, she is so devotedly attached to her that she regards it as a matter of course that she should be taken care of by her forever. The way Karen takes her advantages as a matter of course has always vexed me just a little." "Is Mrs. Talcott interesting?" Gregory pursued his questions with a placid persistence that seemed to indicate real curiosity. "Good heavens, no," Miss Scrotton said. "The epitome of the commonplace. She looks like some of the queer old American women one sees in the National Gallery with Baedekers in their hands and bags at their belts. Fat, sallow, provincial, with defective grammar and horrible twangs. The kind of American, you know," said Miss Scrotton, warming to her description, as she felt that she was amusing Gregory Jardine, "that the other kind always tell you they never by any chance would meet at home." "And what kind of American is Miss Woodruff? The other kind, or Miss Talcott's kind?" "By the other kind I mean Lady Jardine's," said Miss Scrotton, "or no, she constitutes a further variety, the rarest of all, the kind who would never think about Mrs. Talcott one way or the other. But surely Karen is no kind at all. Could you call her an American? She has never been there. She is a sort of racial waif. The only root, the only nationality she seems to have is Mercedes. Her very character is constituted by her relation to Mercedes. Her only charm is her devotion, for she is indeed sincerely and wholeheartedly devoted. Mercedes is a sort of fairy godmother to her, a sun goddess, who lifted her out of the dust and whirled her away in her chariot. But she isn't interesting," Miss Scrotton again assured him. "She is literal and unemotional, and in some ways distinctly dull. I have seen the poor fairy godmother sigh and shrug, sometimes, over her inordinately long letters. She writes to her with relentless regularity, and I really believe that she imagines that Mercedes quite depends on hearing from her. No, I don't mean that she is conceited. It's not that exactly. She is only dull. Very, very dull. And I don't know how Mercedes endures having her so much with her. She feels that the girl depends on her, of course, and she is helplessly generous." Gregory Jardine listened to these elucidations, leaning back in the sofa, a hand clasping his ankle, his eyes turning now on Miss Scrotton, and now on the subject of their conversation. Miss Scrotton had amused him. She was entertainingly simple, if at moments entertainingly intelligent, and he had divined that she was jealous of the crumbs that fell to Miss Woodruff's share from the table of Madame von Marwitz's bounty. A slight malice that had gathered in him during his talk with Eleanor Scrotton found expression in his next remark. "She is certainly charming looking. Anyone so charming looking has a right to be dull." But Miss Scrotton did not heed him. She had risen to her feet. "Here she is!" she exclaimed, looking towards the door in radiant satisfaction. "You will meet her after all. I'll do my very best so that you shall have a little talk with her." The door had been thrown open, and Madame Okraska had appeared upon the threshold. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 4. She stood for a moment with her hand resting on the lintel, and she surveyed an apparently unexpected audience with contemplative melancholy. If she was not pleased to find them so many, she was, at all events, unresentful, and Gregory imagined, from Mrs. Forrester's bright flutter in rising, that resentment from the sun goddess was a peril to be reckoned with. Smiling, though languidly smiling, she advanced up the room, after her graceful and involuntary pause. White fringes rippled softly round her, a white train trailed behind her. On her breast the silken cloak that she wore over a transparent underrobe was clasped with pearls and silver. She was very lovely, very stately, very simple, but she struck her one hypercritical observer as somewhat prepared, calculated and conscious as well. "Thanks, dearest friend," she said to Mrs. Forrester, who, meeting her halfway down the room and taking her hand, asked her solicitously how she did. "I am now a little rested, but it has been a bad night and a busy morning." She spoke with a slightly foreign accent, in a voice at once fatigued and sonorous. Her eyes, clear, penetrating, and singularly steady, passed over the assembled faces, turned, all of them, towards herself. She greeted Sir Alliston with a welcoming smile and a lift of the strange crooked eyebrows, and to Miss Scrotton, who, eager and illuminated, was beside her. "Ah, ma chère," she said, resting her hand affectionately on her shoulder. Mrs. Forrester had her other hand, and so standing between her two friends, she bowed gravely and graciously to Lady Campion, to Miss Harding, to Mrs. Harding, who, in the stress of this fulfilment, had become plum-coloured, and to Gregory Jardine. Then she was seated. Mrs. Forrester poured out her tea. Miss Harding passed her cake and bread and butter. Lady Campion bent to her with frank and graceful compliments. Miss Scrotton sat at her feet on a low settle, and Sir Alliston, leaning on the back of her chair, looked down at her with eyes of antique devotion. Gregory was left on the outskirts of the group, and his attention was attracted by the face of little Mrs. Harding, who, all unnoticed and unseated, gazed upon Madame Okraska with the intent, liquid eye of a pious dog. The wavering, uncertain smile that played upon her lips was like the humble thudding of the dog's tail. Gregory remembered her face now as one of those, rapt and hypnotized, that he had seen on the platform the night before. In the ovation that Madame Okraska had received at the end of the concert, he had noticed this same plum-coloured little lady seizing and kissing the great woman's hand. Shy by temperament, as he saw, to the point of suffering, he felt sure that only the infection of the crowd had carried her to the act of uncharacteristic daring. He watched her now, finding her piteous and absurd. But someone besides himself was aware of Mrs. Harding. Miss Woodruff approached her, smiling impersonally, with rather the air of a kindly verger at a church. Yes, she seemed to say, she could find a seat for her. She pointed to the one she had risen from. Mrs. Harding, almost tearful in her gratitude, slid into it with the precaution of the reverent sightseer. who fears to disturb a congregation at prayer, and Miss Woodruff, moving away, went to a table and began to turn over the illustrated papers that lay upon it. Her manner, retired and cheerful, had no humility, none of the poor dependent's unobtrusiveness. Rather, Gregory felt it showed a happy pride, as if, a fortunate priestess in the temple, she had opportunities and felicities denied to mere worshippers. She was interested in her papers. She examined the pictures with something of a child's attentive pleasure. Gregory came up to her, and raising her eyes, she smiled at him as though, on the basis of last night's encounter, she took him for granted as potentially a friend. "What are you looking at?" he asked her, as he might have asked a friendly child. She turned the paper to him. "The Great Wall of China. They are wonderful pictures." Gregory stood beside her and looked. The photographs were indeed impressive. The sombre landscape, the pallid sky, and winding, as if forever, over hill and valley, the astonishing structure, like an infinite, lonely consciousness. "I should like to see that," said Miss Woodruff. "Well, you travel a great deal, don't you?" said Gregory. "No doubt Madame Okraska will go to China some day." Miss Woodruff contemplated the desolate wall. "But this is thousands and thousands of miles from the places where concerts could be given. And I do not know that my guardian has ever thought of China. No, it is not probable that she will ever go there. And then, unfortunately, I do not always go with her. I travel a great deal, but I stop at home a great deal too. My guardian likes best to be called von Marwitz in private life, by those who know her personally," Miss Woodruff added, smiling again as she presented him with the authorized liturgy. Gregory was slightly taken aback. He couldn't have defined Miss Woodruff's manner as assured, yet it was singularly competent, and no one could have been in less need of benevolent attentions. "I see," he said. "She looks so much more Polish than German, doesn't she? What do you call home?" he added. "Have you lived much in England?" "By home I mean Cornwall," said Miss Woodruff, who was evidently used to being asked questions. "My guardian has a house there, but it has not been for long. It used to be in Germany, and then for a little in Italy. She has only had Les Solitudes for 4 years." She looked across at the group under the chandelier. "There is still room for a chair." Her glance indicated a gap in Madame von Marwitz's circle. This kindly solicitude amused Gregory very much. She had him on her mind as a sightseer, as she had had Mrs. Harding, and she was full of sympathy for sightseers. "Oh, thanks, no," he said, his eyes following hers. "I won't go crowding in." "She won't mind. She will not even notice," Miss Woodruff assured him. "Oh, well, I like to be noticed if I do crowd," Gregory returned, smiling. His slight irony was lost upon her, yet he was sure of it, she was not dull. Her smile showed him that she congratulated him on an ambitious spirit. "Well, later then, we will hope," she said. "You would of course rather talk with her. And here is Mr. Drew, so that this chance is gone." "Who is that singular young man?" Gregory inquired, watching with Miss Woodruff the newcomer, who found a place at once in the gap near Madame von Marwitz, and was greeted by her with a brighter interest than she had yet shown. "Mr. Claude Drew," Miss Woodruff replied with some surprise. "Do you not know? I thought everybody in London knew him. He is quite a famous writer. He has written poetry and essays. Artemis Wedded is by him. That is poetry, and The Bow of Ulysses. The essay on my guardian comes in that. Oh, he is quite well known." Mr. Claude Drew was suave and elegant, and his high, stock-like collar and folded satin neck-gear gave him a somewhat recondite appearance. With his dark eyes, pale skin, full, smooth golden hair, and the vivid red of an advancing Habsburgian lip, he had the look of a young French dandy drawn by Ingres. "My guardian is very much interested in him," Miss Woodruff went on. "She believes that he has a great future. She is always interested in promising young men." This, no doubt, was why Miss Woodruff had so kindly encouraged him to take his chances. "He looks a clever fellow," said Gregory. "Do you like his face?" Miss Woodruff inquired. Mr. Drew, as if aware of their scrutiny, had turned his eyes upon them for a moment. They were large, jaded eyes, lustrous, yet with the lustre of a surface rather than of depth, dense, velvety, and impenetrable. "Well, no, I don't," said Gregory, genially decisive. "He looks unwholesome, I think." "Oh, unwholesome!" Miss Woodruff repeated the word thoughtfully, rather than interrogatively. "Yes, perhaps it is that. It is a danger of talented modern young men, isn't it? They are not strong enough to be so intelligent. One must be very strong, in character, I mean, if one is to be so intelligent. Perhaps he is not strong in character. Perhaps that is what one feels. Because I do not like his face either, and I go greatly by faces." "So do I," said Gregory. After a moment in which they both continued to look at Mr. Drew, he went on. "I wondered last night what nationality you belonged to. I had been wondering about you for a long while before you looked round at me." "You had heard about me?" she asked. He was pleased to be able to say, "Oh, I wondered about you before I heard." "People are so often interested in me because of my guardian," said Miss Woodruff. "Everything about her interests them. But I am an American, if you were not told. That is to say, my father was an American, and my mother was a Norwegian. But though I have never been to America, I count myself as an American, and with right, I think," she added. "We always spoke English when I was a child, and I remember so many of my father's friends. Some day I hope I may go to America. Have you been there?" "Do you know New England? My father came from New England." "No, I've never been there. I'm very insular and untravelled." "Are you? It is a pity not to travel, isn't it?" Miss Woodruff remarked. "But you like it here in England." "Yes, I like it here with Mrs. Forrester, and in Cornwall. But here with Mrs. Forrester always seems to me more like the life of Europe. English life as a rule is, I think, rather like boxes one inside the other." She was perfectly sweet and undogmatic, but her air of cosmopolitan competence amused Gregory, serenely of opinion, for his part, that English was the only life. "Well, the great thing is that the boxes should fit comfortably into one another, isn't it?" he observed. "And I think that on the whole we've come to fit pretty well in England. And we all come out of our boxes, don't we?" he added, pleased with his application of her simile, for a Madame von Marwitz. "Yes, I know," said Miss Woodruff, also evidently pleased. "That is quite true. You all come out of your boxes for her. But as a nation they are not artists, the English, are they? They are kind to the beautiful things. They like to see them. They will take great trouble to see them, but they do not make them. Beauty does not grow here. That is what I mean. It is in its box too, and it is taken out and passed round from time to time. You do not mind my saying this. You perhaps are yourself an artist." "Dear me, no. I'm only a lawyer. I'm shut up in the tightest of the boxes," said Gregory. Miss Woodruff scrutinized him with a smile. "I should not think that of you," she said. "You do not look like an artist, it is true. Few of us can be artists. But you do not look shut into a box either. Beauty to you is something real, not a pastime, a fashion. No, I cannot think it. When I saw your face last night I thought, here is one who cares. One counts those faces on one's fingers, even at a great concert. So many think they care who only want to care. To you, art is a serious thing, and an artist the greatest thing a country can produce. Is that not so?" Gregory continued to be amused by what he felt to be Miss Woodruff's naïveté. He was inclined to think that artists, however admirable in their functions, were undesirable in their persons, and the reverent enthusiasm that Miss Woodruff imagined in him was singularly uncharacteristic. He didn't quite know how to tell her so without seeming rude, so he contented himself with confessing that beauty in his life was kept, he feared, very much in its box. They went on talking, going to an adjacent sofa, where Miss Woodruff, while they talked, stroked the deep fur of an immense Persian cat, Hieronymus by name, who established himself between them. Gregory found her very easy to talk to, though they had so few themes in common, and her face he discovered to be even more charming than he had thought it the night before. She was not at all beautiful, and he imagined that in her world of artists she would not be particularly appreciated, nor would she be appreciated in his own world of convention. A girl with such a thick waist, such queer clothes, a face so broad, so brown, so abruptly modelled. She was, he felt, a grave and responsible young person, and something in her face suggested that she might have been through a great deal. But she was very cheerful, and she laughed with facility at things he said, and that she herself said, and when she laughed, her eyes nearly closed, and the tip of her tongue was caught, with an effect of childlike gaiety, between her teeth. The darkness of her skin made her lips, by contrast, of a pale rose, and her hair, where it grew thickly around her brows and neck, of an almost infantile fairness. Her broad brown eyebrows lay far apart, and her grey eyes were direct, deliberate, and limpid. From where Gregory sat, he had Madame von Marwitz in profile, and he observed that once or twice, when they laughed, she turned her head and looked at them. Presently she leaned a little to question Mrs. Forrester, and then, rather vexed at a sequence, natural but unforeseen, he saw that Mrs. Forrester got up to fetch him. "Tante has sent for you," Miss Woodruff exclaimed. "I am so glad." It really vexed him a little that he should still be supposed to be pining for an introduction. He would so much rather have stayed talking to her. On the sofa she continued to stroke Hieronymus, and to keep a congratulatory gaze upon him, while he was conducted to a seat beside the great woman. Madame von Marwitz was very lovely. She was the type of woman with whom, as a boy, he would have fallen desperately in love, seeing her as poetry personified. And she was the type of woman, all indolent and indifferent as she was, who took it for granted that people would fall desperately in love with her. Her long gaze, now, told him that. It seemed to give him time, as it were, to take her in, and to arrange with himself how best to adjust himself to a changed life. It was not the glance of a flirt. It held no petty consciousness. It was the gaze of an enchantress aware of her own inevitable power. Gregory met the cold, sweet, melancholy eyes. But as she gazed, as she slowly smiled, he was aware, with a perverse pleasure, that his present seasoned self was completely immune from her magic. He opposed commonplace to enchantment, and in him Madame von Marwitz would find no victim. "I have never seen you here before, I think," she said. She spoke with a beautiful precision, that of the foreigner perfectly at ease in an alien tongue, yet not loving it sufficiently to take liberties with it. Gregory said no, she had never seen him there before. "Mrs. Forrester is, it seems, a mutual friend," said Madame von Marwitz. "She has known you since boyhood. You have been very fortunate." Gregory assented. "She tells me that you are in the law," Madame von Marwitz pursued. "A barrister. I should not have thought that. A diplomat, a soldier, it should have been. Is it not so?" Gregory had not wanted to be a barrister. It did not please him that Madame von Marwitz should guess so accurately at a disappointment that had made his youth bitter. "I'm a younger son, you see," he said, "and I had to make my living." When Madame von Marwitz's gaze grew more intent, she did not narrow her eyes, but opened them more widely. She opened them more widely now, putting back her head a little. "Oh," she said, "that was hard. That meant suffering. You are caged in a calling you do not care for." "Oh, no," said Gregory, smiling. "I am very well off. I am quite contented." "Contented?" She raised her crooked eyebrow. "Are you indeed so fortunate? Or so unfortunate?" To this large question Gregory made no reply, continuing to offer her the non-committal coolness of his smile. He was not liking Madame von Marwitz, and he was becoming aware that if one didn't like her one did not appear to advantage in talking with her. He cast about in his mind for an excuse to get away. "The law," Madame von Marwitz mused, her eyes dwelling on him, "it is stony. Yet with stone one builds. You would not be content, I think, with the journeyman's work of the average lawyer. You shape, you create, you have before you the vision of the strong fortress to be built where the weak may find refuge. You are an architect, not a mason. Only so could you find contentment in your calling." "I am afraid that I don't think about it like that," said Gregory. "I should say that the fortress is built already." There was now a change in her cold sweetness. Her smile became a little ambiguous. "You remind me," she said, "that I was speaking in somewhat pretentious similes. I was not asking you what had been done, but what you hoped to do. I was asking it was that interested me in you, as it does in all the young men I meet what was the ideal you brought to your calling?" It was as though, with all her sweetness, she had seen through his critical complacency, and were correcting the manners of a conceited boy. Gregory was a good deal taken aback, and it was with a touch of boyish sulkiness that he replied, "I don't think, really, that I can claim ideals." Definitely now the light of mockery shone in her eye. In evading her, in refusing to be drawn within her magic circle, he had aroused an irony that matched his own. She was not the mere phrase-making woman, by no means the mere siren. "How afraid you English are of your ideals," she said. "You live by them, but you will not look at them. I could say to you, as Statius de Virgil in the Purgatorio, that you carry your light behind you so that you light those who follow, but walk yourselves in darkness. You will not claim them, no, and above all you will not talk about them. Do not be afraid, my young friend, I shall not tamper with your soul." So she spoke, sweetly, deliberately, yet tersely, too, as though to make him feel that she had done all she could for him, and that he had proved himself not worth her trouble. Mr. Claude Drew was still on her other hand, carrying on an obviously desultory conversation with Miss Scrotton, and to him Madame von Marwitz turned, saying, "And what is it you wish to tell me of your Carducci? You will send me the proofs? Good. Oh, I shall not be too tired to read what you have written." Here was a young man, evidently, who was worth her trouble. Gregory sat disposed of, and a good deal discomposed, the more so since he had to own that he had opened himself to the rebuff. He rose and moved away, looking about and seeing that Miss Woodruff had left the room. But Mrs. Forrester came to him, her brilliant little face somewhat clouded. "What is it, my dear Gregory?" she questioned. "She asked to have you brought. Haven't you pleased her?" Mrs. Forrester, who had known not only himself but his father in boyhood, was fond of him, but was not disposed to think of him as important. And she expected the unimportant to know, in a sense, their place, and to show the important that they did know it. There was a hint now of severity in her countenance. It would sound, he knew, merely boyish and sulky to say, "She hasn't pleased me." But he couldn't resist. "I wasn't à la hauteur." Mrs. Forrester at this looked at him hard for a moment. She then diagnosed his case as one of bad temper rather than of malice, and could forgive it in one who had failed to interest the great woman and had been discarded in consequence. Mercedes, she knew, could discard with decision. "Well, when you talk to a woman like Madame von Marwitz, you must try to be worthy of your opportunities," she commented, tempering her severity with understanding. "You really had an opportunity. Your face interested her, and your kindness to little Karen. She always likes people who are kind to little Karen." It was pleasantly open to him now to say, "Little Karen has been kind to me." "A dear, good child," said Mrs. Forrester. "I am glad that you talked to her. You pleased Mercedes in that." "She is a delightful girl," said Gregory. He now took his departure, but he was again to encounter Miss Woodruff. She was in the hall, talking French to a sallow little woman in black, evidently a lady's maid, who had the oppressed, anxious countenance and bright melancholy eyes of a monkey. "Allons," Miss Woodruff was saying in encouraging tones, while she paused on the first step of the stairs, her hand on the banister. "Ce n'est pas un cas perdu, Louise. Nous arrangerons la chose." "Ah, mademoiselle, c'est que madame ne sera pas contente du tout, quand elle verra la robe," was Louise's mournful reply as Gregory came up. "I hoped we might go on with our talk," he said. He still addressed her somewhat as one addresses a friendly child. "I wanted to hear the end of that story about the Hungarian student." "He died in Davos, poor boy," said Miss Woodruff, looking down at him from her slightly higher place, while Louise stood by dejectedly. "He wrote to my guardian, and we went to him there, and she played to him. It made him so happy. We were with him till he died." "Shall I see you again?" Gregory asked. "Will you be here for any time? Are you staying in London?" "My guardian goes to America next week. Did you not know? With Miss Scrotton." "Oh, yes, Eleanor told me. And you're not going too? You're not to see America yet?" "No, not this time. I go to Cornwall." "You are to be alone with Mrs. Talcott all the winter?" "You know Mrs. Talcott?" Miss Woodruff exclaimed in pleased astonishment. "No, I don't know her. Eleanor told me about her too." "It is not being alone," said Miss Woodruff. "She and I have a most happy time together. I thought it strange that you should know Mrs. Talcott. I never met anyone who knew her unless they knew my guardian very well." "And when are you coming back?" "From Cornwall? I do not know. I am afraid we shall not see each other, oh, for a very long time," said Miss Woodruff. She smiled. She gave him her hand, leaning down to him from behind the banister. Gregory said that he had friends in Cornwall, and that he might run down and see them one day, and then he might see her and Les Solitudes too. And Miss Woodruff said that that would be very nice. He heard the last words of the colloquy with Louise as his coat was put on in the hall. "Alors, il ne faut pas renvoyer la robe, mademoiselle?" "Mas non, nos nous tirons d'affaire," Miss Woodruff replied, springing gaily up the stairs, her arm, with a sort of dignified familiarity in which was encouragement and protection, cast round Louise's shoulders. Chapter 5
of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 5. Gregory walked at a brisk pace from Mrs. Forrester's house in Wilton Crescent to Hyde Park Corner, and from there through St. James Park to Queen Anne's Mansions, where he had a flat. He had moved into it from dismal rooms when prosperity had first come to him 5 or 6 years ago, and was much attached to it. It was high up in the large block of buildings, and its windows looked over the greys and greens and silvers of the park, the water shining in the midst, and dim silhouettes of Whitehall rising in stately significance on the evening sky. Gregory went to the balcony and overhung his view contemplatively for a while. The fog had lifted, and all London was alight. The drawing-room behind him expressed an accepted convention rather than a personal predilection. It was not the room of a young man of conscious tastes. It was solid, cheerful, and somewhat neat. There was a great deal of very clean white paint, and a great deal of bright wallpaper. There were deep chairs covered with bright chintz. There were blue and white tiles round the fireplace and heavy polished brass before. On the tables lay buff and blue reviews and folded evening papers, massive paper cutters, and large silver boxes. Photographs in silver frames also stood there, of female relatives in court dress, and of male relatives in uniform. Behind the photographs were pots of growing flowers, and on the walls etchings and engravings after well-known landscapes. It was the room of a young man uninfluenced by Whistler, unaware of Chinese screens, and indifferent to the rival claims of Jacobean and Chippendale furniture. It was civilized, not cultivated, and it was thoroughly commonplace. Gregory thought of himself as the most commonplace of types, the younger brother whose father hadn't been able to do anything for him beyond educating him, the younger son who, after years of uncongenial drudgery, had emerged, tough, stringy, professional, his boyish dreams dead and his boyish tastes atrophied, a usual hard-working, clear-sighted member of society. And there was truth in this conception of himself. There was truth, too, in Madame von Marwitz's probe. He had more than the normal English sensitiveness where ideals were concerned, and more than the normal English instinct for a protective literalness. He didn't intend that anybody should lay their hand on his heart and tell him of lofty aims that it would have made him feel awkward to look at by himself. His fastidiousness was far from commonplace, and so were his disdains. They made cheap successes and cheap ambitions impossible to him. He would never make a fortune out of the law, yet already he was distinguished among the younger men at the bar. With nothing of the air of a paladin, he brought into the courts a flavor of classic calm and courtesy. He was punctiliously fair. He never frightened or bullied or confused. His impartiality could become alarming at times to his own clients, and shady cases passed him by. Everybody respected Gregory Jardine, and a good many people disliked him. A few old friends, comrades in Eton and Oxford, were devoted to him and looked upon him, in spite of his reputation for almost merciless common sense, as still potentially quixotic. As a boy he had been exceptionally tender-hearted, but now he was hard, or thought himself so. He had no vanity, and looked upon his own resolution and dignity as the heritage of all men worth their salt. In consequence, he was inclined to theoretic severity towards the worsted. The sensitiveness of youth had steeled itself in irony. He was impatient of delusions and exaltations, and scornful of the shambling, shamefaced motives that moved so many of the people who came under his observation. Yet, leaning on the iron railing, his gaze softened to a grave, peaceful smile, as he looked over the vast, vaporous scene. Laced with its moving and motionless lines of light, it was this, and its mysteries, its delicacies, its reticent radiance, that expressed him more truly than the commonplaces of the room behind him, accurately as these symbolized the activities of his life. The boy and youth, emotional and poetic, dreamy, if also shrewdly humorous, still survived in a subconscious region of his nature, an Atlantis sunken beneath the traffic of the surface, and, when he learned and gazed, as now, at the lovely evocations of the evening, it was like hearing dimly, from far depths, the bells of the buried city ringing. He was thinking of nothing as he leaned there, though memories, linked in their associated loveliness, floated across his mind. Larch boughs brushed exquisitely against a frosty sky on a winter morning in Northumberland, when, a boy with gun and dogs, he had paused on the wooded slopes near his home to look round him, or the little well of chill, clear water that he had found one summer day gushing from a mossy source under a canopy of leaves, or the silver sky and hills folded in grays and purples that had surrounded him on a day in late autumn when he had walked for miles in loneliness and again had paused to look, receiving the scene ineffaceably, so that certain moods always made it rise before him, and linked by some thread of affinity with these pictures, the face of the young girl he had met that afternoon rose before him, not as he had just seen her, but as he had seen her for the first time, the night before at the concert. Her face came back to him with the larch boughs and the spring of water and the lonely hills, while he looked at London beneath him. She touched and interested him, and appealed to something subconscious as music did. But when he passed from picturing her to thinking about her origin and environment and future, it was with much the same lucid and unmoved insight with which he would have examined some unfortunate creature in the witness-box. Miss Woodruff seemed to him very unfortunate. For her irregular birth he had contempt, and for her haphazard upbringing only pity. He saw no place in a well-ordered society for sculptors who ran away with other men's wives, and lived on chestnuts, and left their illegitimate children to be picked up at the roadside. He was the type of man who, theoretically, admitted of and indeed admired all independences in women. Practically, he preferred them to be sheltered by their male relatives, and to read no French novels until they married, if then. Miss Woodruff struck him as at once sheltered and exposed. Her niche under the extended wing of the great woman seemed to him precarious. He saw no real foothold for her in her present milieu. She only entered Mrs. Forrester's orbit, but that was evident, as a tiny satellite in attendance on the streaming comet. In the wake of the comet she touched, it was true, larger orbits than the artistic, but it was in this accidental and transitory fashion, and his accurate knowledge of the world saw in the nameless and penniless girl the probable bride of some second-rate artist, some wandering, disheveled musician, or ill-educated, ill-regulated poet. Girls like that, who had the aristocrat's assurance and simplicity and unconsciousness of worldly lure, without the aristocrat's secure standing in the world, were peculiarly in danger of sinking below the level of their own type. He went into dress. He was dining with the Armitages, and after thinking of Miss Woodruff, it was indeed like passing from memories of larch woods into the chintzes and medals and potted flowers of the drawing-room to think of Constance Armitage. Yet Gregory thought of her contentedly while he dressed. She was well-dowered, well-educated, well-bred, an extremely nice and extremely pretty young woman, with whom he had danced, dined, and boated frequently during her first 2 seasons. The Armitages had a house at Pangbourne, and he had spent several weekends with them every summer. Constance liked him, and he liked her. He was not in love with her, but he wondered if he might not be. To get married to somebody like Constance seemed the next sense in his sensible career. He could see her established most appropriately in the flat. He could see her beautifully burnished chestnut hair, her pretty profile and bright blue eyes above the tea-table. He could see her at the end of the dinner-table, presiding charmingly at a dinner. She would be a charming mother, too. The children, when babies, would wear blue sashes, and would grow up doing all the proper things at the proper times, from the French bonne and the German Fräulein to Eton and Oxford and dances and happy marriages. She would continue all the traditions of his outer life, would fulfill it and carry it on peacefully and honorably into the future. The Armitages lived in a large house in Queen's Gate Gardens. They were not interesting people, but Gregory liked them none the less for that. He approved of the Armitage type, the kind, courageous, intolerant old general, who managed to find Gladstone responsible for every misfortune that befell the Empire, blithe, easy-going Lady Armitage, the 2 sons in the army, and the son in the navy, and the 2 unmarried girls, of whom Constance was one, and the other still in the schoolroom. It was a small dinner party that night. Most of the family were there, and they had music after it. Constance singing very prettily. She was taking lessons the last 2 nights, she had learned, one by Widor and one by Tosti. Yet as he drove home late, Gregory was aware that Constance still remained a pleasant possibility to contemplate, and that he had come no nearer to being in love with her. It might be easier, he mused, if only she could offer some trivial trick or imperfection, if she had been freckled, say, or had a stammer, or prominent teeth. He could imagine being married to her so much more easily than being in love with her, and he was a little vexed with himself for his own insusceptibility. Constance was the last thing that he thought of before going to sleep, yet it was not of her he dreamed. He dreamed, very strangely, of the little cosmopolitan waif whom he had met that afternoon. He was walking down a road in a forest. The sky above was blue, with white clouds heaving above the dark tree-tops, and it was a still, clear day. His mood was the boyish mood of romance and expectancy, touched with a little fear. At a turning of the road he came suddenly upon Karen Woodruff. She was standing at the edge of the forest, as if waiting for him, and she held a basket of berries, not wild strawberry and not bramble, but a fairy tale fruit that a Hans Andersen heroine might have gathered, and she looked like such a heroine herself, young and strange and kind, and wearing the funny little dress of the concert, the white dress with the flat blue bows. She held out the basket to him as he approached, and, smiling at each other in silence, they ate the fruit with its wild, sweet savor. Then, as if he had spoken and she were answering him, she said, "And I love you." Gregory woke with this. He lay for some moments, still half dreaming, with no surprise, conscious only of a peaceful wonder. He had forgotten the dream in the morning, but it returned to him later in the day, and often afterwards. It persisted in his memory like a cluster of unforgettable sensations. The taste of the berries, the scent of the pine trees, the sweetness of the girl's smile, these things, rather than any significance that they embodied, remained with him like one of the deep impressions of his boyhood. End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Christoph. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 6. On the morning that Gregory Jardine had waked from his dream, Madame von Marwitz sat at her writing table, tearing open, with an air of impatient melancholy, note after note, and letter after letter, and dropping the envelopes into a waste-paper basket beside her. A cigarette was between her lips. Her hair, not dressed, was coiled loosely upon her head. She wore a white silk peignoir, bordered with white fur, and girdled with a sash of silver tissue. She had just come from her bath, and her face, though weary, had the freshness of a prolonged toilet. The room where she sat, with its grand piano and its deep chairs, its sofa and its capacious writing table, was accurately adjusted to her needs. It, too, was all in white, carpet, curtains, and dimity coverings. Madame von Marwitz laughed at her own vagary. But it had only once to be clearly expressed, and the greens and pinks that had adorned her sitting room at Mrs. Forrester's were banished, as well as the rose-sprigged toilet set and hangings of the bedroom. "I cannot breathe among colours," she had said. "They seem to press upon me. White is like air, to live among colours, with all their beauty. It's like swimming under the water. I can only do it with comfort for a little while." Madame von Marwitz looked up presently at a wonderful little clock of gold and enamel that stood before her, and then struck, not impatiently, but with an intensification of the air of melancholy, an antique silver bell that stood beside the clock. Louise entered. "Where is mademoiselle?" Madame von Marwitz asked, speaking in French. Louise answered that mademoiselle had gone out to take Victor for his walk, Victor being Madame von Marwitz's St. Bernard, who remained in England during his mistress's absences. "You should have taken Victor yourself, Louise," said Madame von Marwitz, not at all unkindly, but with decisive condemnation. "You know that I like mademoiselle to help me with my letters in the morning." Louise, her permanent plaintiveness enhanced, murmured that she had a bad headache, and that mademoiselle had kindly offered to take Victor, had said that she would enjoy taking him. "Moreover," Madame von Marwitz pursued, as though these excuses were not worthy of reply, "I do not care for mademoiselle to be out alone in such a fog. You should have known that, too. As for the dress, don't fail to send it back this morning, as you should have done last night. Mademoiselle thought we might arrange it to please Madame. You should have known better if Mademoiselle did not. Mademoiselle has very little taste in such matters, as you are well aware. Do my feet now. I think that the nails need a little polishing, but very little. I do not wish you to make them look as though they have been varnished. It is a trick of yours. Madame von Marwitz then resumed her cigarette and her letters, while Louise, fetching files and scissors, powders and polishers, mournfully knelt before her mistress, and, drawing the mule from a beautifully undeformed white foot, began to bring each nail to a state of perfected art. In the midst of the ceremony, Karen Woodruff appeared. She led the great dog by a leash, and was still wearing her cap and coat. "I hope I am not late, Tante," she said, speaking in English and going to kiss her guardian's cheek, while Victor stood by, majestically benignant. "You are late, my Karen, and you had no business to take out Victor at this hour. If you want to walk with him, let it be in the afternoon." Aye, Louise, what are you doing? Have mercy, I beg of you." Louise had used the file awkwardly. "What is that you have, Karen?" Madame von Marwitz went on. Miss Woodruff held in her hand a large bouquet enveloped in white paper. "An offering, Tante. They just arrived as I came in. Roses, I think. I have already sent 6 boxes downstairs for Mrs. Forrester to dispose of in the drawing-room. You will take off your things now, child, and help me, please, with all these weary people. Bon Dieu, do they really imagine that I am going to answer their inept effusions?" Miss Woodruff had unwrapped a magnificent bunch of pink roses and laid them beside her guardian. "From that good little dark-faced lady of yesterday, Tante." Madame von Marwitz, pausing meditatively over a note, glanced at them. "The dark-faced lady? Don't you remember, Mrs. Harding? Here is her card. She sat and gazed at you, so devoutly, while you talked to Mr. Drew and Lady Campion, and she looked very poor. It must mean a great deal for her to buy roses in January. Un supreme effort," Miss Woodruff quoted, she and her guardian having a host of such playful allusions. "I see her now," said Madame von Marwitz. "I see her face. Congestionné d'émotion ne sait pas." She read the card that Karen presented. "Silly woman. Take them away, child." "But no, Tante. It is not silly. It is very touching, I think. And you have liked pink roses sometimes. It makes me sorry for that good little lady that you shouldn't even look at her roses. No, I see. Dark red and very foolish. I do not like her or her flowers. They look stupid flowers, thick and pink, like fat, smiling cheeks. Take them away." "You have read what she says, Tante, here on the back. I call them very pretty." "I see it. I see it too often. No, go now, and take your hat off, good heavens, child. Why did you wear that ancient sealskin cap?" Karen paused at the door, the rejected roses in her arms. "Why, Tante, it was snowing a little. I didn't want to wear my best hat for a morning walk. Have you no other hat beside the best?" "No, Tante, and I like my little cap. You gave it to me, years ago, don't you remember? The first time we went to Russia together." "Years ago, indeed. I should imagine from its appearance. Well, it makes no difference. You will soon be leaving town, and it will do for Cornwall and Tally." When Karen returned, Madame von Marwitz, whose feet were now finished, took her place in an easy chair and said, "Now to work. Leave the accounts to Schultz. I've glanced at some of them this morning, and, as usual, I seem to be spending twice as much as I make. How the money runs away I cannot imagine. And Tally sends me a great batch of bills from Cornwall. Bon Dieu. Bon Dieu was a frequent ejaculation with Madame von Marwitz, often half-sighed, and with the stress laid on the first word. "Never mind. You will soon be making a great deal more money," said Karen. "It would be more to the point if I could manage to keep a little of what I make. Schultz tells me that my investments in the Chinese railroads are going badly too. Put aside the bills. We will go through the rest of the letters." For some time they worked at the pile of correspondence. Karen would open each letter and read the signature. Letters from those known to Madame von Marwitz, or from her friends, were handed to her. The letters signed by unknown names, Karen read aloud. Begging letters, letters requesting an autograph, letters recommending to the great woman's kindly notice some budding genius, and letters of sheer adulation, listened to, these last sometimes with a dreamy indifference to the end, interrupted sometimes with a sudden azez. There were a dozen such letters this morning, and when Karen read the signature of the last, "Your two little adorers, Gladys and Ethel Bocock," Madame von Marwitz remarked, "We need not have that. Put it into the basket." "But, Tante," Karen protested, looking round at her with a smile, "you must hear it. It's so funny and so nice." "So stupid, I call it, my dear. They should not be encouraged." "But you must be kind. You will be kind, even to the stupid. See, here are 2 of your photographs. They ask you to sign them. There is a stamped and addressed envelope to return them in. Such love, Tante. Such torrents of love. You must listen." Madame von Marwitz resigned herself, her eyes fixed absently on the smoke curling from her cigarette, as if, in its fluctuating evanescence, she saw a symbol of human folly. Gladys and Ethel lived in Clapham, and told her that they came into all her concerts and sat for hours waiting on the stairs. Their letter ended, "Everyone adores you, but no one can adore you like we do. Oh, would you tell us the colour of your eyes? Gladys thinks deep dark grey, but I think velvety brown. We talk and talk about it and can't decide. We mustn't take up any more of your precious time. Your 2 little adorers, Gladys and Ethel Bocock." "Bocock," Madame von Marwitz commented. "No one can adore me like they do. Let us hope not. Petit sauté." "You will sign the photographs, Tante, and you will say, yes, you must, to my kind little admirers. Now be merciful." "Bocock," Madame von Marwitz mused, holding out an indulgent hand for the pen that Karen gave her, and allowing the blotter with the photographs upon it to be placed upon her knee. "And they care for music. Pablo! How many of such appreciators are there, do you think, among my adorers? I do this to please you, Karen. It is against my principles to encourage the schwärmerei of schoolgirls. There." She signed quickly across each picture in a large, graceful and illegible hand, adding, with a smile up at Karen, "To my kind little admirers." Karen, satisfied, examined the signatures, held them to the fire for a moment to preserve their vivid black in bold relief, and then put them into their envelope, dropping in a small slip of paper upon which she had written, "Her eyes are grey, flecked with black, and are not velvety." They had now reached the end of the letters. "A very good, helpful child it is," said Madame von Marwitz. "You are methodical, Karen. You will make a good housewife. That has never been my talent." "And it is my only one," said Karen. "Ah, well, no. It is a good, solid little head in other directions, too. And it is no mean musician that the child has become. Yes, there are many well-known artists to whom I would listen less willingly than to my Karen. It is only in the direction of la toilette." Madame von Marwitz smiled with a touch of roguishness. Only in the direction of la toilette that the taste is rather rudimentary as yet. I was very cross last night, hein?" "It was disappointing not to have pleased you," said Karen, smiling. "And I was cross. Louise had her souffre douleur expression this morning, to an exasperating degree." "We thought we were going to make the dress quite right," said Karen. "It seemed very simple to arrange the lace around the shoulders. I stood and Louise draped me. And Louise is clever, you know." "Not clever enough for that. It was all because with your solitude about Louise, you wanted her to escape a scolding. She took the lace to Mrs. Rowley too late, and did not explain as I told her to do. And you did not save her, you see. Put those 2 letters of Mr. Drew's in the portfolio, so. And now come and sit there. I want to have a serious talk with you, Karen." Karen obeyed. Madame von Marwitz sat in her deep chair, the window behind her. The fog had lifted and the pale morning sunlight struck softly on the coils of her hair and fell on the face of the young girl sitting before her. With her grey dress and folded hands and serene gaze, Karen looked very like the little convent pensionnaire. Madame von Marwitz scrutinized her thoughtfully for some moments. "You are... How old is it, Karen?" she said at last. "I shall be 24 in March," said Karen. "Bon Dieu! I had not realized that it was so much. You are singularly young for your years." "Am I, Tante? I don't know," Karen reflected, genially. "I often feel far older than the people I talk with." "Do you, mon enfant? Some children, it is true, are far wiser than their elders. You are a wise child, but you are young, Karen, very young for your years, in appearance, in demeanour, in candour of outlook. Tell me, have you ever contemplated your future? Asked yourself about it?" Karen, looking gravely at her, shook her head. "Hardly at all, Tante. Is that very stupid?" "Not stupid, perhaps, but again very childlike. You live in the present." "The past was so sad, Tante. And since I have been with you, I have been so happy. There has seemed no reason for thinking of anything but the present." "Well, that is right. It is my wish to have you happy. As far as material things go too, your future shall be assured. I see to that. But you are 23 years old, Karen. You are a woman and a child no longer. Do you never dream dreams of un prince charmant, of a home of your own, and children, and a life to build with one who loves you? If I were to die, and one can count on nothing in life, you would be very desolate." Karen, for some silent moments, looked at her guardian intently and with a touch of alarm. "No, I don't dream," she said then. "And perhaps that is because you fill my life so, Tante. If someone came who loved me very much and whom I loved, I should of course be glad to marry, only not if it would take me from you. And when I look forward at all, I always take it for granted that that will come in time, a husband and children, and a home of my own. But there seems no reason to think of it now. I am quite contented as I am." The kindly melancholy of Madame von Marwitz's gaze continued to fix her. "But I am not contented for you," she observed. "I wish to see you established. Youth passes all too quickly, and its opportunities pass too. I should blame myself if our tie were to cut you off from a wider life. Good husbands are by no means picked up on every bush. One cannot take these things for granted. It is of a possible marriage I wish to speak to you this morning, my Karen. We will talk of it quietly." Madame von Marwitz raised herself in her chair to stretch her hand and take from the mantelpiece a letter lying there. "This came this morning, my Karen," she said, "from our good Lise Leipheim. Frau Leipheim was a warm-hearted, talented, exuberant Jewess who had been a fellow student of Madame von Marwitz's in girlhood. The eagle flights of genius had always been beyond her, yet her pinions were wide and, unburdened by domestic solicitudes, she might have gone far. As it was, married to a German musician much her inferior, and immersed in the care of support of a huge family, she ranked only as second or third rate. She gave music lessons in Leipzig, and from time to time, playing in a quintet made up of herself, her eldest son, and 3 eldest girls, gave recitals in Germany, France, and England. The Leipheim Quintet, in its sober way, held a small but dignified position. Karen had been deposited by her guardian more than once under the Lippheim's overflowing roof in Leipzig, and it was a vision of Frau Lippheim that came to her as her guardian unfolded the letter, of the near-sighted, pale blue eyes, heavy, benignant features, and crinkled red-brown hair. So very ugly, almost repulsively so, yet so kind, so valiant, so untiring. The thought of her was touching, and affectionate solicitude almost effaced Karen's personal anxiety, for she could not connect Frau Lippheim with any matrimonial project. Madame von Marwitz, glancing through her letter, looked up from the last sheet. "I have talked with the good Lise more than once, Karen," she said, "about a hope of hers. She first spoke of it some 2 years ago, but I told her then that I would say nothing to you until you were older. Now, hearing that I am going away, to leave you for so long, she writes of it again. Did you know that Franz was so very much attached to you, Karen?" Franz was Frau Lippheim's eldest son. The vision that now flashed luridly for Karen was that of an immense Germanic face with bright, blinking eyes behind glasses, huge lips, a flattened nose, modelled thickly at the corners, and an enormous laugh that rolled back the lips and revealed suddenly a Semitic element and a boundless energy of kindliness. She had always felt fond of Franz, until this moment. Now, amazed, appalled, a violent repulsion went through her. She became pale. "No, I had not guessed that," she said. Her eyes were averted. Madame von Marwitz glanced at her, and vexation clouded her countenance. She knew that flinty, unresponsive look. In moments of deep emotion, Karen could almost disconcert her. Her face expressed no hostility, but a sternness, blind and resisting, like that of a rock. At such moments, she did not look young. Madame von Marwitz, after her glance, also averted her eyes, sighing impatiently. "I see that you do not care for the poor boy. He had hoped, with his mother to back him, that he might have some chance of winning you, though it is not Franz who writes." She paused, but Karen said nothing. "You know that Franz has talent, and is beginning now to make money steadily. Lise tells me that, and I would give you a little dot, enough to assure your future and his. I only speak of the material things because it is part of your childishness never to consider them. Of him I would not have spoken at all, had I not believed that you felt friendship and affection for him. He is so good, so strong, so loyal, that I did not think it impossible." After another silence, Karen found something to say. "I have friendship for him. That is quite different." "Why so, Karen?" Madame von Marwitz inquired. "Since you are not a romantic schoolgirl, let us speak soberly. Friendship, true friendship, for a man whose tastes are yours, whose pursuits you understand, is the soundest basis upon which to build a marriage. No, only as a friend. A friend not too near do I feel affection for Franz. It is repulsive to me, the thought of anything else. It makes me hate him, said Karen. Tiens! Madame von Marwitz opened her eyes in genuine surprise. I could not have imagined such decisive feeling. I could not have imagined that you despise the good Franz. I need not tell you that I do not agree with you here. I do not despise him. Ah, there is more than mere negation in your look, your voice, my child. It is pride, wounded pride, that speaks. And it is as if you told me that I had less care for your pride than you had, and thought less of your claims. I do not think of my claims. You feel them. You feel Franz your inferior. I did not think of such things. I thought of his face, near me, and it made me hate him. Karen continued to look aside with a sombre gaze, and after examining her for another moment, Madame von Marwitz held out her hand. Come, she said. Come here, child. I have blundered. I see that I have blundered. Franz shall be sent about his business. Have I hurt you? Do not think of it again. The girl got up slowly, as if her stress of feeling made her awkward. Stumbling, she knelt down beside her guardian and, taking the hand and holding it against her eyes, she said in a voice heavy with unshed tears, Am I a burden? Am I an anxiety? Let me go away then. I can teach. I can teach music and languages. I can do translations, so many things. You have educated me so well. You will always be my dear friend, and I shall see you from time to time. But it is as you say. I am a woman now. I would rather go away than have you troubled by me. Madame von Marwitz's face, as she listened to the heavy voice that trembled a little over its careful words, darkened. It is not well what you say, Karen, she replied. No, you speak to me as you have no right to speak, as though you had a grievance against me. What have I ever done that you should ask me whether you are a burden to me? Only, said Karen, her voice more noticeably trembling, only that it seemed to me that I must be in the way if you could think of Franz as a husband for me. I do not know why I feel like that, but it hurt me so much that it seems to me to be true. It has always been a joy to care for you, said Madame von Marwitz. I have always loved you like my own child. I do not admit that to think of Franz as a husband for you was to do you a wrong. I would not listen to an unfitting suitor for my child. It is you who have hurt me, deeply hurt me, by so misunderstanding me. Sorrow and reproach grew in her voice. Forgive me, said Karen, who still held the hand before her eyes. Madame von Marwitz drew her hand gently away, and raising Karen's head so that she could look at her, I forgive you indeed, Karen, she said. How could I not forgive you? But, child, do not hurt me so again. Never speak of leaving me again. You must never leave me, except to go where the fuller happiness beckons. You do not know how they stabbed, those words of yours. That you could think then, believe them. No, Karen, it was not well. Not only are you dear to me for yourself, there is another bond. You were dear to him. You were beside me in the hour of my supreme agony. You desecrate our sacred memories when you allow small suspicions and fears to enter your thoughts of me. So much has failed me in my life. May I not trust that my child will never fail me? Tragic grief gazed from her eyes, and Karen's eyes echoed it. Forgive me, Tante. I have hurt you. I have been stupid. She spoke almost dully, but Madame von Marwitz was looking into the eyes. deep wells of pain and self-reproach. "Yes, you have hurt me, ma chérie," she replied, leaning now her cheek against Karen's hand, "and it is not loving to forget that when the cup of suffering brims, a drop the more makes it overflow. You are harsh sometimes, Karen, strangely harsh." "Forgive me," Karen repeated. Madame von Marwitz put her arms around her, still leaning her head against hers. "With all my heart, my child, with all my heart," she said. "But do not hurt me so again. Do not forget that I live at the edge of a precipice, an inadvertent footstep, and I crash down to the bottom to lie mangled. Ah, my child, may life never tear you, burn you, freeze you, as it has torn and burned and frozen me. Ah, the memories, the cruel memories." Great sighs lifted her breast. She murmured, while Karen knelt enfolding her, "His dead face rises before me. The face that we saw, Karen, and I know to the full again my unutterable woe." It was rare with Madame von Marwitz to allude thus explicitly to the tragedy of her life, the ambiguous, the dreadful death of her husband. Karen knelt holding her, pale with the shared memory. They were so for a long time. Then, sighing softly, "Bon Dieu, bon Dieu," Madame von Marwitz rose and, gently putting the girl aside, she went into her bedroom and closed the door. End of Chapter 6. Recording by Christoph. Chapter 7 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Christoph. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 7. It was a hard, chill morning, and Gregory, sauntering up and down the platform at Euston, beside the open doors of the long steamer train, felt that the taste and smell of London was, as nowhere else, concentrated, compressed, and presented to one in tabloid form, as it were, at a London station on a winter morning. It was a taste and smell that he, personally, rather liked, singularly compounded as it was, to his fancy, of cold metals and warm, sooty surfaces, of the savour of kippers cooking over innumerable London grates, and the aroma of mugs of beer served out over innumerable London bars, something at once acrid yet genial, suggesting sordidness and unlimited possibility. The vibration of adventure was in it, and the sentiment, oddly intermingled, of human solidarity and personal detachment. Gregory, as he strolled and waited for his old friend and whilom Oxford tutor, Professor Blackburn, whom he had promised to see off, had often to pause or to deviate in his course, for though it was still early, and the season not a favourite one for crossing, the platform was quite sufficiently crowded, and crowded, evidently, with homeward-bound Americans, mostly women. Gregory tended to think of America and its people with the kindly lightness common to his type. Their sameness didn't interest him, and their differences were sometimes vexatious. He had a vague feeling that they'd really better have been colonials and be done with it. Professor Blackburn last night had reproved this insular levity. He was going over with an array of discriminations that Gregory had likened to an explorer's charts and instruments. He intended to investigate the most minute and measure the most immense, to lecture continually, to dine out every evening and to write a book of some real appropriateness when he came home. Gregory said that all that he asked of America was that it should keep its institutions to itself and share its pretty girls, and the professor told him that he knew more about the latter than the former. There were not many pretty girls on the platform this morning, though he remarked one rather pleasing young person who sat idly on a pile of luggage and fixed large, speculative, innocently assured eyes upon him when he went by, while near her, her mother and a tawny sister disputed bitterly with a porter. Most of the ladies who hastened to and fro seemed, while very energetic, also very jaded. They were packed as tightly with experiences as their boxes with contraband clothing, and they had both, perhaps, rather heavily on their minds, wondering, it was probable, how they were to get them through. Some of them, strenuous, eye-glassed and scholastic, looked, however, as they marshalled their pathetically lean luggage, quite innocent of material trophies. Among these alien and unfamiliar visages, Gregory caught sight suddenly of one that was alien, yet recognisable. He had seen the melancholy simian features before, and after a moment he placed the neat black person, walking beside a truck piled high with enormous boxes, as Louise, Madame von Marwitz's maid. To recognise Louise was to think of Miss Woodruff. Gregory looked around the platform with a new interest. Miss Woodruff was nowhere to be seen, but a new element pervaded the dingy place, and it hardly needed the presence of 4 or 5 richly dressed ladies bearing sheaves of flowers, nor that of 2 silk-hatted, impresario-looking gentlemen with Jewish noses, to lead Gregory to infer that the element was Madame von Marwitz's, and that he had inadvertently fallen upon the very morning of her departure. Already an awareness and an expectancy was abroad, that reminded him of that in the concert hall. The contagion of celebrity had made itself felt even before the celebrity herself was visible, but in another moment Madame von Marwitz had appeared upon the platform, surrounded by cohorts of friends. Dressed in a long white cloak and flowing in sables, a white lace veil drooping about her shoulders, a sumptuous white feather curving from her brow to her back, she moved amidst the scene like a splendid, dreamy ship entering some grimy northern harbour. Mrs. Forrester, on heels as high as a fairy godmother's, and wearing a strange velvet cloak and a stranger velvet bonnet, trotted beside her. Sir Alliston was on the other hand, his delicate Van Dyck features nipped with the cold. Mr. Claude Drew walked behind, and before went Eleanor Scrotton, smiling a tight, stricken smile of triumph and responsibility. As the group passed Gregory, Miss Scrotton caught sight of him. "We are in plenty of time, I see," she said. "Dear me, it has been a morning. Mercedes is always late. Could you, I wonder, induce these people to move away? She so detests being stared at." Eleanor, as usual, roused a mischievous spirit in Gregory. "I'm afraid I'm helpless," he replied. "We're in a public place, and a cat may look at a king. Besides, who could help looking at those marvellous clothes?" "It isn't a question of cats, but of impertinent human beings," Miss Scrotton returned with displeasure. "Allow me, madame." She forged a majestic way through a gazing group. "Where is Miss Woodruff?" Gregory inquired. He was wondering. "Tiresome girl," Miss Scrotton said, watching the ladies with the flowers who gathered around her idol. "She will be late, I'm afraid. She had forgotten Victor." "Victor? Is Victor the courier? Why does Miss Woodruff have to remember him?" No, Victor is Mercedes' dog, her dearly loved dog," said Miss Scrotton. her impatience with an ignorance that she suspected of wilfulness tempered, as usual, by the satisfaction of giving any and every information about Madame von Marwitz. It is sort of a superstition within her that she should always be on the platform to see her off. It will be serious, really serious, if Karen doesn't get him here in time. It may depress Mercedes for the whole of the voyage. And where has she gone to get him? Oh, she turned back nearly at once. She was with us in the carriage, and we passed Louise in the omnibus with the boxes. Unfortunately, Karen noticed that Victor wasn't with her. It turned out, when we stopped and asked Louise about him, that she had given him to the footman to take for a walk, and she thought he had been brought back to Karen. Karen took a hansom at once and went back. She really ought to have seen to it before starting. I do hope she will get here in time. Madame, if you please, we really can't get by. A little woman, stout but sprightly, in whom Gregory recognized the agitated mother of the pretty girl, evaded Miss Scrotton's extended hand and darted past her to place herself in front of Madame von Marwitz. She wore a large box-like hat from which a blue veil hung. Her small features, indeterminate in form and incoherent in assemblage, expressed to an extraordinary degree determination and strategy. She faced the great woman. "Baroness," she said in swift yet deliberate tones, "allow me to present myself. Mrs. Hamilton K. Slifer. We have mutual friends, Mrs. Tolman, Mrs. General Tolman of St. Louis, Missouri. She had the pleasure of meeting you in Paris some years ago, an old family friend of ours. My girls, Baroness, Maud and Beatrice. They won't forget this day. We're simply wild about you, Baroness. We were at your concert the other night." Maud, the lean and tawny, and Beatrice, the dark and pretty, had followed deftly in their mother's wake and were smiling, Maud with steely brightness, Beatrice with nonchalant assurance at Madame von Marwitz. "Bon Dieu," the great woman muttered. She gazed away from the Slifers and about her with helpless concentration. Then, slightly bowing her head and murmuring, "I thank you, madame," she moved on, her friends closing around her. Miss Scrotton, pale with wrath, put the Slifers aside as she passed them. "Well, girls, I knew I could do it," Miss Slifer ejaculated, drawing a deep breath. They stood near Gregory, and Beatrice, who had adjusted her camera, was taking a series of snaps of the retreating celebrity. "We've met her anyway, and perhaps if she ever comes on deck we'll get another chance. That's a real impertinent woman she's got with her. Did you see her try and shove me back?" "Never mind, mother," said Beatrice, who was evidently easy-going. "I snapped her as she did it, and she looked ugly enough to turn milk sour. My, do look at the girl with the queer cap and the big dog. She's a freak, and no mistake. Stand back, Maud. Let me have a shot at her." "Why, I believe it's the adopted daughter," Maud exclaimed. "Don't you remember? She was in the front row when we heard those people talking about her. I think she's a distinguee myself. She looks like a Russian countess." It was indeed Miss Woodruff who had arrived, and Gregory, whose eyes followed the Slifers, was aware of a sudden emotion on seeing her. It was the emotion of his dream, touched and startled and sweet, and even more than his dream, she made him think of a Hans Andersen heroine, with the little sealskin cap on her fair hair and a long furred coat reaching to her ankles. She stood holding Victor by a leash, looking about her with a certain anxiety. Gregory made his way to her, and when she saw him, she started to meet him, gladly, but without surprise. "Where is Tante?" she said. "Is she already in the train? Did she send you for me?" "You are in very good time," he reassured her. "She is over there. You see her feather now, don't you? I'll take you to her." "Thank you so much. It has been a great rush. Have you heard of my misfortunes? By good chance I found the quickest cab." She was walking beside him, her eyes fixed before them on a group where she saw her guardian's plume and veil. I don't know what Tante would have done if Victor had not been here in time to say goodbye to her. Madame von Marwitz was holding a parting reception before the open door of her saloon carriage. Flowers and fruits lay on the tables. Louise and Miss Scrotton's maid piled rugs and cushions on the chairs and divans. One of the Jewish gentlemen stood with his hat pushed off his forehead, talking in low, important tones to a pallid young newspaper man who made rapid notes. Madame von Marwitz at once caught sight of Karen and Victor. Past the intervening heads she beckoned Karen to come to her, and she and Gregory exchanged salutes. In her swift smile on seeing him, he read a mild amusement. She could only think that, like everybody else, he had come to see her off. The cohorts opened to receive Miss Woodruff, and Madame von Marwitz enfolded her and stooped to kiss Victor's head. Gregory watched the little scene, which was evidently touching to all who witnessed it, and then turned to find Professor Blackburn at his elbow. He too, it appeared, had been watching Madame von Marwitz. "Yes, I heard her 2 years ago in Oxford," he said, "and even my antique blood was stirred, as much by her personality as by her music. A most romantic, most pathetic woman. What eyes, and what a smile." "I see that you are one of the stricken," said Gregory. "Shall I introduce you to my old friend, Mrs. Forrester? She'll no doubt be able to get you a word with Madame Okraska, if you want to hear her speak." "No," the professor said. He preferred to keep his idols remote and vaguely blurred with incense. "Who is the young Norse maiden?" he inquired. "The one you were with? Those singular ladies are accosting her now." Karen Woodruff, on the outskirts of the group, had been gazing at her guardian with a constrained smile in which Gregory detected self-mastery, and turned her eyes upon the Slifers as the professor asked his question. Mrs. Slifer, marshalling her girls and stooping to pat Victor, had introduced herself, and while Gregory told the professor that that was Miss Woodruff, Madame Okraska's ward, she bent to expound to the Slifers the inscription on Victor's collar, speaking, it was evident, with kindness. Gregory was touched by the tolerance with which, in the midst of her own sad thoughts, she satisfied the Slifers' curiosity. "Then she really is Norse," said the professor. "Really half Norse." "I like her geniality and her reticence," said the professor, watching the humours of the little scene. "Those enterprising ladies won't get much out of her. They must relinquish her now. Her guardian is asking for her. I suppose it's time I got into my compartment." The groups were breaking up, and the travellers, detaching themselves from their friends, were taking their places. Madame von Marwitz, poised above a sea of upturned faces on the steps of her carriage, bent to enfold Karen Woodruff once more. Doors then slammed, whistles blew, green flags fluttered, and the long train moved slowly out of the station. Standing at a little distance from the crowd and holding Victor by his leash, Miss Woodruff looked after the train with a fixed and stiffened smile. She was near tears. The moment was not a propitious one for speaking to her, yet Gregory felt that he could not go without saying goodbye. He approached her, and she turned grave eyes upon him. "And you are going to Cornwall now?" said Gregory, patting Victor's head. "Yes, I go tomorrow," said Miss Woodruff in a gentle voice. "Have you friends there?" Gregory asked. "And books? Things to amuse you?" "We see the rector and his wife and 1 or 2 old ladies now and then, but it is very remote, you know. That is why my guardian loves it so much. She needs the solitude after her rushing life. But books, oh yes, my guardian has an excellent library there. She is a great reader. I could read all day, in every language if I wanted to. As for amusement, Mrs. Talcott and I are very busy. We see after the garden and the little farm. I practice and take Victor out for walks." She had quite mastered her emotion, and Gregory could look up at her frankly. "Isn't there something I could send you," he said, "to help pass the time? Magazines? Do you have them? And sweets? Do you like sweets?" His manner was half playful, and he smiled at her as he might have smiled at a young schoolgirl. If only those wide braids under the little cap had been hanging over her shoulders, the manner would have been justified. As it was, Gregory felt with some bewilderment that his behaviour was hardly normal. He was not in the habit of offering magazines and sweets to young women, but his solicitude expressed itself in these unconventional forms, and luckily she found nothing amiss with them. She was accustomed, no doubt, to a world where such offerings passed freely. "It is very kind of you," said Miss Woodruff. "I should indeed like to see a review now and then. Mr. Drew is writing another little article on my Guardian, in one of this month's reviews. I did not hear which one, and I would like to see that very much. But sweets? No. When I like them too much and eat too many, and then I am sorry. Please don't send me sweets." She was smiling. "What do you like to eat, then, that doesn't make you sorry, even when you eat a great deal?" "Roast beef," she said, laughing, and the tip of her tongue was caught between her teeth. She was charmed to feel that, for the moment, at least, he had won her from her sadness. "But you get roast beef in Cornwall." "Oh, excellent. I will not have roast beef, please." "Fruit, then. Do you like fruit?" "Yes, indeed." "And you don't get much fruit in Cornwall in winter." "Only apples," she confessed, "and dried apricots." He elicited from her that nectarines and grapes were her favourite fruits, but in the midst of their talk she became suddenly grave again. "I do not believe that you had a single word with her after I came." His face betrayed his bewilderment. "Tante," she enlightened him. "But before then, you did speak with her. She had sent you to look for me." The depths of her misconception as to his presence were apparent. "No, it was by chance I saw you," he said, "and I didn't have any time to talk with Madame von Marwitz." He had no time to undeceive her further, if it had been worth while to undeceive her, for Mrs. Forrester, detaching herself from the larger group of bereaved ones, joined them. "I can't give you a lift, Gregory?" she asked. "You were going citywards. We are all feeling very bleak and despoiled, aren't we? What an awful place a station is when someone has gone away from it." "Mrs. Forrester," said Karen Woodruff, with wide eyes, "he did not have one single word with her. Mr. Jardine did not get any talk at all with Tante. Oh, that should have been managed." But Mrs. Forrester, though granting to his supposed plight a glance of sympathetic concern, was in a hurry to get home, and he was again spared the necessity of a graceless confession. He piloted them through the crowd, saw them, Miss Woodruff, Mrs. Forrester and Victor, fitted into Mrs. Forrester's brougham, and then himself got into a hansom. It was still the atmosphere of the dream that hovered about him as he decided at what big fruit shop he should stop to order a box of nectarines. He wanted her to find them waiting for her in Cornwall. And the very box of nectarines, the globes of sombre red fruit nested in cotton wool, seemed part of the dream. He knew that he was behaving curiously, but she was, after all, the little Hans Andersen heroine, and one needn't think of ordinary customs where she was concerned. End of Chapter 7. Recording by Christoph.
Chapter 8 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 8. Les Solitudes, February 2nd. Dear Mr. Jardine, how very, very kind of you. I could hardly believe it when Mrs. Talcott told me that a box was here for me. I could think of nothing to explain it. Then, when we opened it and saw row upon row those beautiful things like pearls in a casket, it made me feel quite dazed. Nectarines are not things that you expect to have, in rows, all to yourself. Mrs. Talcott and I ate 2 at once, standing there in the hall where we opened them. We couldn't wait for chairs and plates and silver knives. Things taste best of all when eaten greedily, I think, and I think that these will all be eaten greedily. It is so kind of you. I thank you very much. Yours sincerely, Karen Woodruff. Les Solitudes, February 9th. Dear Mr. Jardine, it is most kind of you to write me this nice note and to send me these reviews. I often have to miss the things that come out in the reviews about my guardian, for the press cuttings go to her. Mr. Drew says many clever things, does he not? He understands music, and he understands, at least almost, what my guardian is to music. But he does not, of course, understand her. He only sees the greatness, and sees it made out of great things. When one knows a great person intimately, one sees all the little things that make them great. Often such very little things that Mr. Drew could not know. That is why his article is, to me, rather pretentious. Nor will you like it, I think. He fills up with subtleties the gaps in his knowledge, and that makes it all so artificial. But I am most glad to have it. Sincerely yours, Karen Woodruff. Les Solitudes, February 18th. Dear Mr. Jardine, the beautiful, great box of fruit arrived today. It is too good and kind of you. I am wondering now whether muscatel grapes are not even more my favorites than nectarines. This is a day of rain and wind, soft rain blowing in gusts, and the wind almost warm. Victor and I have come in very wet, and now we are both before the large wood fire. London seems so far away that New York hardly seems further. You heard of the great ovation that my guardian had. I had a note from her yesterday, and 2 of the New York papers. If you care to read them, I will gladly send them. They tell in full about the first great concert she has given, and the criticism is good. I will ask you to let me have them back when you have read them. With many, many thanks. Sincerely yours, Karen Woodruff. Les Solitudes, February 28th. Dear Mr. Jardine, I am glad that you liked the box of snowdrops, and that they reached you safely, packed in their moss. I got them in a little copse a few miles from here. The primroses will soon be coming now, and if you like, I will send you some of them. I know one gets them early in London. But don't you like best to open yourself a box from the country, and see them lying in bunches with their leaves? I like even the slight flatness they have. But mine are very little flattened. I am good at packing flowers. My guardian always tells me so. You are probably right in not caring to see the papers. They are always much alike in what they say. It was only the glimpse of the great enthusiasm they gave that I thought might have interested you. Next week she goes to Chicago. I am afraid she will be very tired, but Miss Scrotton will take care of her. Sincerely yours, Karen Woodruff. Les Solitudes, March 17th. Dear Mr. Jardine, I have taken up my pen for only 2 purposes since I left London, to write my weekly letter to my guardian, and to thank you over and over again. Only now you have quite spoiled Mrs. Talcott and me for our stewed dried fruit that we used to think so nice before we lived on grapes and nectarines. Indeed, I have not forgotten the primroses, and I shall be so delighted to pick them for you when the time comes, though I suspect it is sheer kindness in you that gives me the pleasure of sending you something. Your nice letter interested me very much. Yes, we have Dominique in the library here, and I will perhaps soon read it. I say perhaps, because I am reading Wilhelm Meister. My guardian was quite horrified with me when she found I had never read it, and must finish that first, and it is very long. Is Dominique indeed your favourite French novel? My guardian places Stendhal and Flaubert first. For myself, I do not care much for French novels. I like the Russians best. Sincerely yours, Karen Woodruff. Les Solitudes, April 2nd. Dear Mr. Jardine, you make a charming picture of the primroses in the blue and white bowls for me, and of your view over the park. London can be so beautiful. I, too, care for it very much. It is beautiful here now, the hedges all white with blackthorn, and the woods full of primroses. My guardian must now be in San Francisco. She is back in New York in May, and is to give 3 more great concerts there. I am impatiently waiting for my next letter from her. I am so glad you like the primroses. Many, many thanks for the fruit. Yours sincerely, Karen Woodruff. Les Solitudes, April 5th. Dear Mr. Jardine, what you say makes me feel quite troubled. I know you write playfully, yet sometimes one can dire la vérité en riant, and it is as if you had found my letters very empty and unresponsive. I did not mean them to be that, of course, but I am not at all in the habit of writing letters, except to people I am very intimate with. Indeed, I am in the habit only of writing to my guardian, and it is difficult for me to think that other people will be interested in the things I am doing. And in one way I do so little here. Nothing that I could believe interesting to you. Nothing really, but have walks and practice my music and read. And talk sometimes with Mrs. Talcott. About once in 2 months the vicar's wife has tea with us, and about once in 2 months we have tea with her. That is all. And I am sure you cannot like descriptions of landscapes. I love to look at landscapes, and dislike reading what other people have to say about them. And is not that the same with you? It is quite different that you should write to me of things and people, for you see so many, and you do so much, and you know that to someone in the depths of the country all this must be very interesting. So do not punish me for my dullness by ceasing to write to me. Sincerely yours, Karen Woodruff. Les Solitudes, April 10th. Dear Mr. Jardine, of course I will write you descriptions of landscapes, and of all my daily routine, if you really care to hear. No, I am not lonely, though of course I miss my guardian very much. I have the long, long walks with Victor, in wet weather over the inland moors along the roads, and in fine weather along the high cliff paths. Sometimes we walk 10 miles in an afternoon, and come back very tired for tea. In the evenings I sit with Mrs. Talcott over the fire. You ask me to describe Mrs. Talcott to you, and to tell you all about her. She is with me now, and we are in the morning room, where we always sit, for the great music room that opens on the veranda and fronts the sea is shut when my guardian is not here. This room looks over the sea too, but from the side of the house and through an arabesque of trees. The walls are filled with books, and flowering bulbs stand in the windows. We have had our tea, and the sunlight slants in over the white freesia and white hyacinths. There are primroses everywhere, too, and they make the room seem more full of sunlight. You could hardly see a more beautiful room. Mrs. Talcott sits before the fire, with her skirt turned up, and her feet in square-toed shoes on the fender, and looks into the fire. She is short and thick and very old, but she does not seem old. She is hard, not soft and withered. She has a large, calm face, with very yellow skin, and very light blue eyes set deeply under white eyebrows. Her hair is white and drawn up tightly to a knot at the top of her head. She wears no cap, and dresses always in black, very plain, with, in the daytime, a collar of white lawn turning over a black silk stock and bow, such as young girls wear, and in the evening a little fichu of white net, very often washed, and thin and starchy. And since her skirts are always very short, and her figure so square, she makes one think of a funny little girl, as well as of an old woman. She comes from the state of Maine, and she remembers a striving, rough existence in a little town on the edge of wildernesses. She is a very distant relation of my guardian's. My guardian's maternal grandparents were Spanish and lived in New Orleans, and a sister of Senor Bastida's. Bastida was the name of my guardian's grandfather, married a New Englander from Vermont, and that New Englander was an uncle of Mrs. Talcott's. Do you follow? Her uncle married my guardian's aunt, you see. Mrs. Talcott in her youth stayed sometimes in New Orleans, and dearly loved the beautiful Dolores Bastida, who left her home to follow Pavelek Okraska. Poor Dolores Okraska had many sorrows. Her husband was not a good husband, and her parents died. She was very unhappy, and before her baby came, she was in Poland then, she sent for Mrs. Talcott. Mrs. Talcott had been married too, and had lost her husband, and was very poor. But she left everything, and crossed to Europe in the steerage, and what it must have been in those days, imagine, to join her unfortunate relative. My guardian has told me of it. She calls Mrs. Talcott un cor d'or dans un cor de bois. She stayed with Dolores Okraska until she died a little time after. She brought up her child. They were in great want. My guardian remembers that she had sometimes not enough to eat. When she was older and had already become famous, some relatives of the Bastidas heard of her and helped. But those were years of great struggle for Mrs. Talcott, and it is so strange to think of that provincial, simple American woman, with her rustic ways and accent, living in Cracow and Warsaw and Vienna, and steadily doing what she had set herself to do. She speaks French with a most funny accent, even yet, though she spent so many years abroad, so many in Paris. I do not know what would have become of my guardian if it had not been for her. Her father loved her, but was very erratic and undisciplined. Mrs. Talcott has been with my guardian for almost all the time ever since. It is a great and silent devotion. She is very reticent. She never speaks of herself. She talks to me sometimes in the evenings about her youth in Maine, and the long white winters, and the sleigh rides, and the tapping of the maple trees in spring, and the nutting parties in the fall of the year. I think that she likes to remember all this, and I love to hear her, for it reminds me of what my father used to tell me of his youth, and I love especially to hear of the trailing arbutus, that lovely little flower that grows beneath the snow, how one brushes back the snow in early spring and finds the waxen, sweet, pink flowers and dark shining leaves under it. And I always imagine that it is a double nostalgia that I feel, and that my mother's Norway in spring was like it, with snow and wet woods. There is a line that brings it all over me. In May, when sea winds pierced our solitudes. It is by Emerson. The spring here is very lovely too, but it has not the sweetness that arises from snow and a long winter. Through the whole winter, the fuchsias keep their green against the white walls of the little village, huddled in between the headlands at the edge of the sea beneath us. You know this country, don't you? The cliffs are so beautiful. I love best the great headlands towards the Lizard, black rock or gray, all spotted with rosettes of orange lichen, with sweeps of gray-green sward sloping to them. Victor becomes quite intoxicated with the wind on these heights, and goes in circles round and round like a puppy. Later on, all the slopes are veiled in the delicate little pink thrift, and the stone walls are festooned with white campion. Then Mrs. Talcott and I have a great deal to do about the little farm. Mrs. Talcott is so clever at this, she makes it pay, besides giving my guardian all the milk and eggs and bacon too she needs. There is a farmer and his wife, and a gardener and a boy. but with the beautiful garden we have here, it takes most of the day to see everything. The farmer's wife is a stern-looking woman, but really very gentle, and she sings hymns all the day long while she works. She has a very good voice, so that it is sweet to hear her. Yes, I do play. I have a piano here in the morning room, and I am very fond of my music. And as I have told you, I read a good deal too. So there you have all the descriptions and the details. I liked so much what you told me of the home of your boyhood. When I saw you, I knew that you were a person who cared for all these things, even if you were not an artist. What you tell me, too, of the law courts and the strange people you see there, and the ugly, funny side of human life amused me, though it seems to me more sorrowful than you perhaps feel it. People amuse me very much sometimes, too, but I have not your eye for their foibles. You draw them rather as Forain does. I should do it, I suspect, with more sentimentality. The fruit comes regularly, once a week, and punctual thanks seem inappropriate for what has become an institution. But you know how grateful I am, and for the weekly punch. So, gemütlich and bien pensant, and often very, very funny, with a funniness that the continental papers never give one. Their jests are never the jests of the bien pensant. It is the acrid atmosphere of the café they bring, not that of the dinner party, or better still, for punch, the picnic. The reviews, too, are very interesting. Mrs. Talcott reads them a good deal, she who seldom reads. She says sometimes very acute and amusing things about politics. My guardian has a horror of politics, but they rather interest Mrs. Talcott. I know nothing of them, but I do not think that my guardian would agree with what you say. I think that she would belong more to your party of freedom and progress. What a long letter I have written to you! I have never written such a long one in my life before, except to my guardian. Sincerely yours, Karen Woodruff. Les Solitudes, April 15th. Dear Mr. Jardine, how very nice to hear that you are coming to Cornwall for Easter and will be near us. At least Falmouth is quite near with a motor. It is beautiful country there, too. I have driven there with my guardian, and it is a beautiful town to see, lying in a wide curve around its blue bay. It is softer and milder than here. A bend of the coast makes so much difference. But why am I telling you all this, when of course you know it? I forget that anyone knows Cornwall but Mrs. Talcott and my guardian and me. But you have not seen this bit of the coast, and it excites me to think that I shall introduce you to our cliffs and to Les Solitudes. If only my guardian were here! It is not itself, this place, without her. It is not to see Les Solitudes if you do not see the great music room opening its 4 long windows on the sea and sky, and my guardian sitting in the shade of the veranda looking over the sea. But Mrs. Talcott and I will do the honours as best we may, and tell you everything about my guardian that you will wish to know. Let us hear beforehand the day you are coming, for the cook makes excellent cakes, and we will have some baked especially for you. How very nice to see you again. Sincerely yours, Karen Woodruff. End of chapter 8.